Good morning.
Morning.
My pleasure once again to welcome you to the committee's 8th meeting. Thank you again for your commitment to Texas and for your leadership as we work together to provide the coordinating board advice and recommendations regarding the development of the next long-term strategic plan for Texas higher education. As usual for our meeting today, each of you has a packet containing our agenda, the minutes from the October 9th meeting, biographies of our presenters from outside the coordinating board, hard copies of the presentations and handouts are in your package with a blue binder. A document entitled Goals with Possible Targets, Indicators, and Strategies for the Next Higher Education Plan. We'll be using this document during our working luncheon and our committee discussions this afternoon. Coordinating board staff assemble this document to stimulate our discussions about the potential goals for the plan, related measurable targets that will define the state's progress toward meeting these goals, and related strategies designed for goal accomplishment. Also want to call your attention to a document at your places regarding what we anticipate to be our final meeting dates for our upcoming meetings. Also at your places is the most up-to-date draft agenda for the 2014 Leadership Conference, Planning Educationally for a Competitive Global Economy, that will be held November 20 and 21st next week in Austin at the Doubletree. Presentations and discussions regarding the potential goals, targets, and strategies for the new higher education plan will be the focus of panel discussions and workshops on November 21st to provide the opportunity for higher education leaders to offer input regarding the proposed plan. And I'm pleased to say that a number of us are there to help present and to moderate on Friday the 21st. Thank you, and thank you for your commitment there. In terms of our agenda today, after the approval of the minutes from our October 9th meeting, we'll hear from Dr. Wynn Rosser, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Greater Texas Foundation. Dr. Rosser will focus on how student debt can be influenced by dual credit and early college high school programs. After discussions with Dr. Rosser, we'll hear from Dr. Lawrence Abel, Director of the Institute for Academic Leadership and Provost Emeritus of Florida State University. Dr. Abel will focus on how college students' levels of debt can be influenced by the provision of guided pathways to college completion. Directly after Dr. Abel's presentation and our discussions with him, we'll take a short break to retrieve our lunches before coming back together as a committee, discuss the 4 proposed goals that are summarized in the goals and possible targets and strategy document included in your packet. And we'll spend approximately 20 minutes on each goal. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. Bob Ferguson has made a recommendation to modify the minutes, which is highlighted, as you can see, which I think is an appropriate modification. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from our October 9th meeting as modified? No. Motion made. A second? All right, seconded. Any opposed? I see none opposed. The minutes are approved. Finally, before I introduce Dr. Rosser, I wanted to remind you that we've been looking to the future to determine a strategic plan that inspires and advances student success, and a plan that will help position Texas as a leader in an increasingly complex world economy. Each of our meetings has had a strategic focus and has featured experts from higher education and the workforce. So far, we've considered an overall state goal, a completion goal of workforce, marketable skills goal, and a student cost, student debt goal. We'll be considering those goals again today. So with that, unless anybody has any questions, I'd like to begin our discussion today by introducing Dr. Rosser. Has a detailed biography in your packet. Dr. Rosser joined the Greater Texas Foundation as the Executive Director in January 2007. Promoted to President and Chief Executive in January 2012. He's responsible for the Foundation's day-to-day operations and translating the strategic intent of the Foundation's Board of Directors into daily operations. Completing his master's degree in 1992, he began working with the Texas A&M University Association of Former Students as Director of Campus Programs, subsequently served as visiting faculty member and undergraduate advisor and the Department of Agricultural Education, and primarily taught courses in leadership development. September 1998, he joined the Office of the Vice President for Student Affairs, and later became they took the position of Chief of Staff in the Office of Student Affairs. Both of Dr. Rosser's graduate degrees are from Texas A&M University. Currently serves as a lecturer in the Bush School of Government and Public Service at Texas A&M. And with that, I'd like to welcome Win Rosser.
Okay, the red light means I'm on. I want to begin by saying there is objective evidence that early college and dual credit are effective strategies for increasing readiness, access, and completion in the post-secondary context. Texas, because of wise public policy and committed professionals and practitioners in the field, has built a platform to decrease time to degree and student debt. We're going to talk some about that this morning and then have some recommendations for you to that end. However, I want to begin with a little bit more information personally. The information that Mr. Hunt shared with you is all correct and true, but there's another piece of information buried in that bio, and it's that I do have an associate's degree from Kilgore College. And Dr. Abel and I were talking before we got started. He has an associate's degree as well. And I mentioned to him that I didn't understand just how important that associate's degree was, or how much I took it for granted until I started doing the work that I'm doing now at Greater Texas Foundation. For me, it was a convenience, a way to get a head start on college. My first college courses were at Kilgore College. I probably got a jump start because of that I didn't appreciate at the time. And so that personal piece of history, combined with my father being an educator, a career teacher for more than 34 years, being raised in rural East Texas, really kind of colors the way I think about the opportunities that are available to students now in higher education, and it certainly influences the way I think about post-secondary preparation, access, persistence, and completion. Although I firmly believe the statement before you today, I started as a skeptic, thinking about early college. Especially early college. And we made a trip, Mr. Hunt, to El Paso when we first started thinking about early college. And we visited with students themselves who were just finished their freshman year at Mission Early College, and many of whom already had 20, almost 30 hours of college credit behind them. And in the course of this summer experience, they were telling us about all the things they were also doing to accelerate their post-secondary efforts. They were enrolled in summer classes even that summer as having just finished their freshman year. We decided to take a risk. For us, it was a huge risk. Those of us, and many members of our board, have post-secondary experience as administrators and faculty members. And for us, it was a huge risk thinking, well, can these 14-year-olds really do college credit work? But talking to the students, talking to the faculty, visiting the place actually convinced us that it was worth the risk. So you fast forward about a year, and we are at the Canutillo, Commissioner. At the ribbon cutting of the Canutillo Northwest Early College High School. And we do the typical ceremony where all the officials speak and bore the students. And we went off to the reception. And we're at the library there on the Northwest Early College, or the Northwest campus of El Paso Community College. And I'm kind of at the back of the library. And I see this mother and family trailing her enter the room, and she makes a beeline for me. And she comes up to me and she says, Dr. Rosser, thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you. We just can't thank you enough, effusive. And she goes on to say, my son will be. And she stops herself at that point. And she says, my son is the first person in our family to attend college. Because this was Friday of the first week of school, and her son had already attended college classes. The thing about that family, it was a mom dressed in a, best I can recall, like a hotel custodial smock, older son who was the student at the early college, trailing little brother and little sister, and a dad dressed in a uniform with the patch of the business on one side and his name on the other. Clearly a family who was willing to invest in their children and wanted the best for them. That's where I started believing that there was something to this, and I believe that family's lives are forever changed because of this experience. So I want to talk to you some about the heart connection that I made with that story, and then also some data. So heart matched with data, and I think we can make some good decisions based on that. So what is the platform? It's 108 early college high schools serving about 34,000 students a year, 87% of whom are underrepresented, 76% are Hispanic, 72% are economically disadvantaged, and 65% are first-generation college goers. They are the Closing the Gaps population. According to the coordinating board, we have about 108,000 students enrolled last fall in dual credit. Why is it that I think that this is an effective platform? So what is early college, and why is it an effective platform? Early college is not a panacea. It is not the silver bullet. Early college and dual credit are effective strategies. They have to be combined with some other things that we need to do really well. When you think about the three things that are the best predictors of a post-secondary outcome in a credential: parental education, family income, and the rigor of the high school experience. We can do something only about one of those three things in the short term, and that's the rigor of the high school experience, and that's the intent of dual credit in early college. I might need some help from the technical staff starting this video. Is there somebody in the booth that can click on the... There we go. There we go. Can we get some volume? If not, I can narrate it for you. I've watched it lots of times. I think the thing about this video is that it demonstrates that when the adults figure out the structures and the supports, students can rise to the challenge. And that's really one of the key things about early college and dual credit, is that high expectations, high level of rigor, supports and structures, and the students achieve. And that's clear from some evidence that we'll go through after we hear from Jaime, who I'll tell you is a freshman at Stanford right now, having graduated from PSJ North at Far San Juan Alamo. We may need to come back to it just out of the interest of time. Again, I can give you the high points.
So when do you want us to defer and then come back, or do you want?
Yes, right. I'll keep moving. If we can just, if we can just pause the video, and I'll tell you what the bottom line is. First, I think it's always wonderful to hear students talk to you about their own experiences, and so that's why I wanted to include Jaime today. Again, Jaime is a student, actually a graduate now of Far San Juan Alamo Schools, PSJA North, the early college campus. He received his associate's degree last May. You got it. And now we'll hear actually from Jaime.
I'm Jaime Lopez. I'm an outgoing senior here at PSJ North High School, an incoming freshman at Stanford University. As I finish up my senior year, I'm going to graduate with an associate's in mathematics.
Jaime is a very good example of the early college program. He has impacted a lot of students.
Being friends with Jaime and seeing how much he has grown in himself with this knowledge and education, he has been a great example and role model for me. Coming to North, we start with our APs, and then we begin with our dual courses, and then off to scholarships and applications.
An opportunity to enroll in like a differential equations class or a linear algebra class. That's not something you find in every high school. I think that's why PSJ North and the early college program here has made me extremely marketable.
And the early college program has made sure that we have the best teachers and the best work so we can be ready and prepared.
Getting this associate's degree basically free because of the courses that were available here at PSJ North, it means a lot because I can say I'm a more prepared scholar basically at a college level without having to pay every class and every textbook.
The early college program allows for students to not only gain their associates, but to build strong relationships with each other, because it's so close-knit that it allows those struggling ones to want to be like the high-achieving ones.
Me and Jaime, we are first-generation students from our family that go to college. That's very important, and that drives us into doing more and obtaining more. So our families and other generations can see that we could do it.
Seeing the accomplishments, the acceptance, the admissions that he's receiving, not only him, all the students. We have 60-some students that are on track to get their associates. They're the first group, and I guess they hold a special place in my heart.
Porque me dijo que
my youngest son, Jesus, was asked by one of his teachers in his middle school who his hero was, and he mentioned that it was my son Jaime because his self-driven motivation towards school.
Jaime has been the valedictorian since our freshman year into our senior year. So I really think that has impacted me. I mean, people say like, oh, that valedictorian guy is in my class. That's my friend.
The whole program is giving me like a lot of confidence because I know that I can go out there and make big decisions and impact a lot of people.
Jaime said it much better than I would have. Dr. Faulkner, did you notice the periodic table?
Oh, absolutely.
Jaime's zeroing in on linear algebra and differential equations, how those things aren't available just to any student in any high school. Did you also notice his little brother, for whom Jaime is the hero, wearing the Rice sweatshirt? Again, a first-generation family with a little brother who's aspiring perhaps not to Stanford but to Rice. In addition to Jaime, last spring, South Texas College awarded 1,500 associate's degrees to students before those students received their high school diplomas. Like my earlier story, I hope Jaime's story connected with your heart. And now let's look at some data. This is a study out of UT Pan American, and the citation is available there at the bottom. It's also in the back of the slide deck that I provided with Dr. Smith. This is one chart. There are many. The four-year graduation rates here of any prior college versus no prior college. Here the prior college graduation rates are 20% higher for those who had prior college. 5- and 6-year graduation rates are 30% higher. Educate Texas data for students who are attending early college. We know from that data, which is based on coordinating board data, so it's Educate Texas analysis, 71% of the students who graduate from early colleges enroll immediately in post-secondary education compared to 55% for the state average. For our target population, the students we're most interested in the foundation, for those who don't immediately enroll, about 1% go on to earn a post-secondary credential within the following 6 years after high school. This is the Jobs for the Future study statewide in Texas. For those who had prior college hours, those students who had prior college hours, they're 20%, had a 20% premium on graduation, any college credential. The bars on the left are the baccalaureate degrees. The bars in the middle are associate's degrees. And on the right is the total all degrees. So again, a 20% premium for anyone, any student with dual enrollment or prior credit hours. This is a chart you've already seen. Dr. William Serrata, president of El Paso Community College, showed this to you a few months ago. But in reviewing his presentation, I thought it stood out as a success point, something that's, again, triangulates back to this notion that these are successful strategies. At El Paso Community College, persistence rates and completion rates increase with increased hours of dual credit prior to enrollment. So here's Tony. This picture is of Tony Montez when he was a 15-year-old student at Northwest Early College High School in Canutillo. We often hear about the importance of family influencing family, but in this case it's kind of the reverse of what you would expect. What Tony says here is that his parents were initially skeptical about college and high school, but they let him enroll. And then after his mom saw his transcript, she decided to enroll in El Paso Community College. Tony is now a student at the University of Arizona, majoring in accounting and Spanish. So intergenerational here, son influencing mother, intergenerational in Jaime's story, older brother influencing younger brother, his hero. This is an evaluation, a chart from an evaluation report of GTF Scholars. GTF Scholars is our foundation's signature scholarship program focused on graduates of Texas early college high schools who want to earn a baccalaureate. It's offered at Texas A&M University, the University of Houston, the University of North Texas, and UT Brownsville. For our first cohort of students, who are currently some of them in their third year as university students, 65% of cohort 1 have a GPA of 3.0 or better. In our total program now, encompassing 3 cohorts, there are almost 350 students enrolled. So of the things that we've heard from Jaime's story, from Tony's story, and from some of the data, there's an increase in college readiness, an increase in college knowledge, college access, college completion, and this intergenerational effect. And so you might think, well, it'd be really hard to monetize that, but I think it can be monetized, and I'll do it in a bit of a reverse. On the left is information coming out of the coordinating board's 7th grade cohort information, but indexed to the 9th grade, so we can compare it to the nation. Makes the point that we have a leak in our pipeline from elementary, post-secondary education, middle school through secondary and post-secondary education. So you'll see in all respects, Texas lags the states in graduation from high school, entering college, enrolling the sophomore year, and graduating within 150% of program time. Information on the right is from Dr. Steve Murdoch, who I know is advising the committee, and it projects what are the outcomes in 2040 if we don't reverse those trends. An increase in households living in poverty, a decrease in household income, $15 billion a year less in tax revenue, and an increase of $100,000 or increase of 100,000 of our fellow Texans in prison. So dual credit and early college address the leaks. They are effective strategies. If you think about the stories that we've heard and the data that we've seen, again, Texas has built the platform. And when it works well, students can complete a baccalaureate in 2 years. 6 GTF scholars graduated from UT Brownsville this past spring in their second year at UTB. There's a common theme across these students. None of the 6 changed majors, and none of the 6 had problems transferring courses in and having those courses being applied to their degree program. At UT El Paso, another excellent example of where this is working, right now there are 350 high school students enrolled in upper division courses, meaning junior and senior university courses. So far, 110 early college high school graduates have graduated from UTEP, 74 of them in less than 3 years. When you think about the monetary benefits of dual credit and early college, going back to that UT Brownsville example, just for illustration, the cost of attendance at UT Brownsville is very affordable, actually, relative to the state and nation, about almost $14,000 a year for an undergraduate living at home. So if you think about a student, in our case, who came in with 2 years of college credit, was able to graduate in 2 years, the cost of attendance would have been just under $28,000. For a student without prior college hours on a 4-year plan, the cost would have been about $56,000. And if you look at UT Brownsville again, and these averages are low compared to the state and national averages. The average loan debt for a student enrolled 2 years at UT Brownsville would be just under $7,400, and the average loan debt on the 4-year plan would be $14,700 or so. So you can start to understand that by accumulating college credit, by having that college credit apply to a credential at a university, you can reduce time to degree and you can reduce student debt. So this is a good to great situation, or a better to best situation. Our platform isn't broken, but we can get more out of it to degrees time to degree, and student debt. We have the platform for success for the students who need it most, the Closing the Gaps population. We just need to get more out of that platform, and to that end, offer a few recommendations. First, early college and dual credit are effective. We have objective, triangulated evidence where the students coming out of early college and dual credit are doing better than their peers. We need to ensure that more students have access, especially regarding access to dual credit, for which funding models vary greatly from institution to institution. Sometimes a dual credit is offered free to the student with no out-of-pocket cost to the student, sometimes at a cost, which restricts access, especially to low-income and first-generation college-goers who need it the most. Increased funding and support for district-wide early college implementation. So the early models for early college were that there were 400 student campuses. There are districts in the state that are exploring district-wide implementation. Brownsville and Far San Juan Alamo are models. And then ensuring that a high school student's 61st hour is at a university to avoid excess hours not applying to a degree. Again, UT El Paso is the best example of that, where right now 350 high school students are taking upper division courses. Dr. Abel is going to talk more about this, and I think this is critical, not just for early college and dual credit students, but for anyone transferring between a community college and a university or a university to a university. Creating a seamless transfer pathway to ensure credits apply to university degrees with no lost hours. Some examples of things that might work there: enhanced advising around credit transfer, stronger school district, community college, and university regional partnerships. On average, 70% of the students in our state stay local for higher education. So this really is a regional, local strategy game. Encouraging early college and dual credit students to complete the 42-hour Texas core. And although we have a 42-hour academic core that is supposed to transfer as a block, and as we have the same guarantee for the field of study curricula, what I understand from the field is that the way those two guarantees are being applied varies a great deal. I think it would be interesting to ask universities to certify annually which classes out of the field of study curricula or the core, 42-hour core, are not being applied to a university credential. And finally, requiring all institutions to fully adopt and list courses according to the Texas Common Course Numbering System. Students trying to navigate and figure out what courses apply. It's difficult if you have several degrees and you're trying to look at a university or degree program's website and then track back to a local community college and do the crosswalk of which course really is English 1301. If you're a first-generation family without the resources to really dig in, we're setting them up at a disadvantage. Likewise confusing is our financial aid system. I would say prioritize early college and dual credit students for need-based grant and scholarship aid. They are college ready and they are more likely to graduate. And again, we're seeing evidence after evidence of that. And then finally, simplify student aid. It's complex and hard to understand. This chart is the financial aid system we expect students and parents to understand. That's the financial aid picture from several years ago, but it hasn't changed substantially, of financial aid in Texas. Far left bars are the federal aid, you have state aid in the shades of blue, institutional aid, and then finally private aid over in the yellow. Private scholarships are only 4% of total aid in Texas. Everything else is either federal, state, or institutional. And students have to navigate this and then compare it institution to institution and try to figure out where they're getting the best deal. So in terms of understanding affordability, being much more transparent about what institutions are charging, what are the costs, and then what aid is available, and simplifying aid offers and getting the aid offers out early enough so that students actually have time to make an informed choice. I'll end here where I started and say that I believe there is objective evidence that dual credit and early college are effective strategies to increase college readiness, access, and completion. Texas has a platform to decrease time to degree and student debt. Again, we have evidence of where that's happening. We just need to get more out of that platform, take advantage of the wise policy decisions that have been made in the past, the evidence that's available to us now, and realize that if we set the expectations high, and if the adults figure out the structures and the supports, students will rise to the challenge and achieve. Be happy to visit Mr. Hunt if there are any questions.
Let me just comment, and then we'll take questions. About Educate Texas. They are an example of why this country is so different than the rest of the world. That we've got a nonprofit that's really our change agent, dealing with our most difficult, at least in my view, problem of our transition from our K through 12 system successfully into higher education. So I want to compliment and also we often see the Greater Texas Foundation represented through like Educate Texas and others. So in a sense, it doesn't get the credit that it's due, I think, in some respects. So I just wanted to say thank you for playing this leadership role, which has really been very important in the state. And with that, I'd like to open it up. Bernie?
Thank you. Dr. Rosser, question. Are they just unnecessarily complicated ways of delaying or a competency-based overall system of education?
I don't understand your question, sir.
Well, if you had a competency-based education system, okay, would you need early college and dual credits and all that kind of stuff?
Well, that's first a hypothetical, which are always dangerous. I think you would. I think for the same reasons that we need early college and dual credit now. Again, the students who need it most need to be provided the structure to enter into a competency-based system or a credit hour-based system that we have now. I'm a big fan of competency-based programs. We support some competency-based work. For example, Western Governors University is one of our grantees. And so I think it makes sense. I would need to think more about, what would the implications be and how would you create the structure to support students. I think there's... And Commissioner, I think I was reading some minutes from the committee, and you made a point about this in an earlier meeting. It might have been the one where Dr. Serrata presented. We assume that from May, when an 18-year-old graduates high school, to the September when they enroll in higher education, that they go from a very structured environment to a very unstructured environment, that something miraculous happens when they cross the high school stage or over those intervening 3 months, when really we know from student development theory that those 18-year-old college freshmen are not too different than the 18-year-old high school student, and they still need supports to go along with the challenges. And so the supports that work for early college students and dual credit students are good for all students. The system as it works now works for about 28% of us. And this sink or swim mindset that we've used for so long is really a mindset of an era when higher education was for a privileged few, as opposed to higher education being essential for a community or a region or a state or a national, being essential. So I think that if we approach competency-based education with the same sink or swim attitude that we tend to approach higher education with now, that I don't know if the results would be too different, but I would need to think more about it. So that's the dangerous hypothetical that I waded into.
You confused me.
Dr.
Yes, Steve.
A suggestion. I'm right now the president of the board of managers for the El Paso Independent School District. They threw out the trustees, and Michael Williams appointed a group of us. We're getting ready to do two in high school college-ready programs within the schools, early college, within the schools, within the high schools, as opposed to a separate deal. One of the things that I like about the fact of dual credit is that it requires a master's degree for the teacher. Mm-hmm. And I have a great concern about teacher competency. And AP does not require that. But at the same time, on the suggestions, you might want to throw in, I don't think we are doing either at EPISD or across the state enough to reward in the way of compensation stipends to a master's degree. And I think there ought to be something in there that recommends that the teachers be compensated appropriately with a differential to the regular teachers.
So if I were here talking about staffing structure for early college high school, I would have loved that recommendation. And so I agree with your point that, and actually I am supportive of AP as well. I think anything that gets that rigorous high school experience is important, but in the case of differentiated pay for different kinds of teachers, I'd be supportive of that in general. Yes, Bob.
I have a question relative to your recommendation on seamless transfer. And I recall when I was president of A&M Corpus Christi that we worked hard to get articulation agreements with the local community colleges. Do those reflect down into the dual credit as well, such that they ought to go from dual credit through the community college into the university structure?
Not as well as they should. Certainly students could benefit from the articulation agreements that exist, but again, we're expecting students to know that articulation agreement exists on a campus and access it. So you could find yourself in a major metro area, Corpus Christi, Corpus Christi would be an example perhaps too, where you have a student at a high school or a community college, if they're in dual credit or at a community college in a typical pattern, where they would be, let's say, majoring in business. And there may be 4 state universities that would be logical choices for them to attend.
Correct.
There are quite possibly 4 different articulation agreements for that student would have to navigate from institution A, B, C, or D. And so again, we're forcing it on the student. And in some cases, in one case I'm familiar with, there's an 18-hour lower division sequence of courses that must be taken, very prescriptive, for a student to then be qualified for admission into upper division business courses at one of these institutions. So again, a student in high school in the 9th grade, if they're an early college student, or a student at a community college, has to know that, well, for institution A, I've got to take those 18 hours, and for institution D, they may be a very different set of courses because they're designed by the local faculty. So articulation agreements are helpful. As a faculty member, I negotiated articulation agreements, but they're negotiated from faculty to faculty based on each faculty's view of the world according to them. And I think there are some examples. The tuning project, for example, that we've done with engineering, that where we've demonstrated that you can get the faculties together and agree broadly on what the discipline requires, but it takes working at that level.
I was going to follow it up then and ask you what your recommendation would be to try and get that seamless transfer, as you sing here, as much as possible in terms of being able to take that dual credit thing and assure that it's going to apply towards that 4-year degree once the students get to that point.
So there's a couple of ways to do that, sir, I think. More than a couple. One, we have these existing guarantees. There's already in statute the field of study curricula and the 42-hour academic core. Dr. Gardner and I were in a meeting a couple of weeks ago where he made with community college and university leaders and others, where he made a very forceful statement that to the extent that the coordinating board knows that those guarantees are not being honored, the coordinating board follows up on that because it's statute. But at the same time, a student must know that that is a guarantee, and that for whatever reason the guarantee isn't being honored when they transfer in and they're pursuing a degree to which that course should apply. So that's the reason for having this certification. I think the universities ought to provide a rationale for why they're not honoring those guarantees that are already in statute. Beyond that, again, 70 to 80% of the students stay local for higher education in our state. You can look at things regionally, where it makes sense to work with the local high schools that are providing dual credit in early college, the local community colleges, and the local regional university. You could do this regionally. You could do it statewide. There are states that have done it. Dr. Abel's going to talk some about that from his perspective. There are others. It's a problem that can be solved to the extent that we want to.
But it seems to me then a lot of responsibility reflects on the instructor for that particular course to explain to the students at the very outset that this course will have this particular longevity to it, I guess, if you want to use that word, or it can be used in this particular manner at these particular universities. Is that logical?
That would be one way to approach it, but that depends on how many faculty are there in the state, Commissioner?
How many what?
How many faculty do we have in the state?
Well, no, I'm talking about the ones within the high schools. And
so we got 1,600 high schools in the state. So a school-by-school approach, I would say, or a faculty member-by-faculty member approach, I would say, that would be something that certainly could be done. I would encourage us to think about something at a policy level, though, where a faculty member doesn't have to understand it or remember it, but that it happens at the institutional level systemically from a policy perspective. But certainly knowledgeable faculty members at the high school level, knowledgeable counselors are key to students understanding and navigating some of this. We just don't have enough counselors, and the responsibilities of counselors aren't what we think they are, and they perhaps never were what we think they are, thought they were. Counselors are very busy. And to the extent that they can pay attention to some of these issues, I think they have other requirements placed on them often where they're not as focused on college advising as we would hope they would be.
Dr. Gardner?
To add very quickly, as a result of this conversation, I just walked over and asked staff for our next meeting to do an analysis of students who actually are been reported to us as core completers, their time to degree and semester credit hours to degree compared to other community college transfers, just to give you a better sense of how that's happening. There has been some belief by some administrators at community colleges that in some cases they're not designating this students as core completers. That could be part of the issue, but it's also the case, as you say, if the students don't know, they don't know what they don't know. But we'll get that data to you. So,
Yes. Yes, Jerry.
Do you, if we greatly expanded early college and dual credit, in your opinion, do we have enough qualified teachers to teach the courses to the quality that we feel like we need to have in order for them to be successful in college?
I don't have the answer to that question. I don't know. We could do an analysis, and actually I know it's being done district by district right now, and for example in Forest San Juan Alamo and Brownsville. And the strategy they're using in Brownsville, they initially approached us actually for some funding to offer master's degree programs so that more teachers could teach the dual credit classes. But and through conversation, what we decided they needed to do first was go back and assess which teachers had master's degrees and which teachers had somewhere between 3 and 18 hours in the field that they would be teaching to meet the SACS accreditation requirements. Based on their analysis, they found out they had a lot of teachers that were in the 3, 6, 9 hour range with a master's degree and already with some graduate content in the course they were going to be teaching. So it's not always as heavy a lift as you think it is. It's not going out and earning a master's degree. It's a master's plus the 18 hours. And then when you look at it that way, there are a lot of teachers in Texas schools with master's degrees, and so it's not quite as heavy a lift. Clearly, a focus on teacher quality, the input of teacher that the teacher brings to the classroom, regardless if they're K-12 or higher ed, is really important. And when you start talking about expanding access, that's a critical question because there is a human capacity to it.
Thank you. Kathy?
It would be helpful, and this may be a David question, to better understand this certification process. So what if an institution fails to certify a report on the number of students that they determined did not meet the requirements of the articulation agreement or whatever? And then does anybody, once they file this certification report, read it to see if there are anomalies? And then are there any incentives or penalties? I mean, this field of study has been going on 3 decades, between...
This has been going not that long, but it's been going on.
It's been going. I mean, it was going on when I was here, and that was right after WW2. So,
well, I think it started out just after the Korean War. But as I've said, and Wynn mentioned, it would be helpful. I've heard again that some community colleges have students that complete the field of study or complete the core, but they don't report that to us, which they're required to in their data, but we can't know that if they don't do it. We can follow up when we know that that's happened. But also, too often students aren't completing those at all, and so there's just a gap between what's happening on the campuses and what we can help with. We recently sent out an overview of the field of study, the transfer, and various other guidelines and requirements to all the community college trustees, all the university regents, so that they would be aware that these exist. And these, getting these two working may not be enough, but we need to at least make sure we're using the tools we are. We have just issued rules. Now we have to have rules for every committee for a number of new field of study committees to update the field of study guides and to add some additional ones. Because we've heard from some community colleges that the field of study guides aren't up to date, and perhaps they're not, and we can fix that, but if they were up to date, even if they weren't up to date, the universities would have to give credit for them in any regard. But one thing we're going to look at when we do that is sort of the overflow or the overlap between the field of study guide and the core, to make sure that the things required in the major, so for example, if you're majoring in engineering, you take the right mathematics within the core. Because if you don't, you'll get credit for the core, but you'll still have to take that calculus again, or the multivariable calculus that you didn't. And so that's another one of the issues. Hopefully long term, the legislature passed a law that students have to have, and it seems unusual that we'd have to have this law, but a student has to have a degree plan in place after 45 semester credit hours. That's been an issue as well, and I think one thing we have to think about, even in terms of the early college high schools and dual credit, is that being taken into account when the students enrolling in those courses in high school? Are those courses going to lead them to what they want to do? I think it will be beneficial regardless, but if you want it to be an efficient process. So it's a complex process. I do think the community colleges, Texas Success Council and their Success Center are doing a lot of things that will help move things in the right direction. But frankly, in a state the size of Texas, and so many institutions, it's always a challenge to get everybody on the same page and understand how all the mechanics work. And I think we need to find better, more efficient ways to do that. There are also some great efforts underway at the University of Texas at Austin with a number of community colleges around the state to smooth that process. And so we just need to make sure that all of these are coordinated in an efficient way and we don't develop some 4 or 5 very good systems that actually conflict with each other.
I think Dr. Abel's presentation you can see how if you have pathways or meta majors with the field of study curricula built in, the 42-hour core built in, you can see how it becomes something that a student can't escape. That it's not up to the student to know, it's not up to the faculty to know, it's just the way we do business. Everyone has a degree plan, everyone is on a plan, everyone is on a pathway. That would be effective and helpful for dual credit and early college students, just as it would for any student at any community college that is seeking a transfer credential. So, some of these recommendations are not exclusive to early college and dual credit. They would be good for any student. Smoothing the transfer process would be beneficial to everyone.
And let me endorse that, because when Mary Smith was working with the voluntary transfer compacts, it became evident very quickly as we went through engineering into chemistry and several other areas that there was a significant overlap in terms of some of the courses that were required at that level. And so we started to talk about something similar, which was, say for example, a science and engineering core versus a humanities core and a business core, where you could really lay out some of those things so that within the core, you've made those right choices in terms of math, in terms of science. Biology just isn't going to work for a number of fields, even though it will count in the core, but you perhaps should have been taking chemistry and physics.
So I just want to come back. Dr. Gardner said something earlier that I think is important. This may be a reporting issue. I've looked at the field of study transfer data, and there are some large community college systems that report 0 students transferring the field of study curricula. So that would be interesting to trace down. That would be really random for it to be almost statistically impossible for 0 students out of thousands not to complete a field of study and transfer it. And so I think that would be an interesting thing to do. And then this notion of meta majors, the right classes for the right types of majors. In Texas, we know, we've done the research at the foundation, if you're going to be a STEM major at any Texas university, the entry-level mathematics course that the faculty expect you to have is either pre-calculus or calculus, not college algebra. There are some Texas universities that don't teach college algebra nor accept it on any degree plan. Yet that's what frames our whole national conversation around math and college readiness. It's not that you don't have, at community colleges it's going to be algebra or some other class. It's not that there aren't really bright students at community colleges that could do pre-calculus or calculus. It's just not what the degree program expects. But in universities, if you want to decrease time to degree, increase success on the courses then that depend on calculus and pre-calculus, students need to be ready for pre-calculus or calculus when they enter. Large numbers of students enter college thinking they're going to be a STEM major, end up graduating just from another major, largely due to math.
Dr. Faulkner.
Yes, thank you. I thank you for your presentation, Wynn. There's nobody in Texas thinking more effectively about the whole of education in our state than you. And what the Greater Texas Foundation has been doing under your leadership is really remarkable, and I just want to thank you for that. But I'd also like to have your answer to this question, or your thoughts about it. When I first started thinking about early college, high school, and dual credit and those things, my immediate reaction was, why isn't this less education? You're going to have a situation where a student would have taken a course, and then you're going to let that time in high school count for the experience that they would have had later, so they won't have the later experience. And that I had a hang-up with that for quite a while. And I think for a strong student, a very strong student, that might turn out to be actually the reality. But in the end, I've come around to having support for early college and for dual credit because it strengthens the high schools, it streamlines the programs, and reduces costs, and it increases the likelihood that students will finish. So in the end, taking the integral over the whole state, it's more education, not less, although for the individual it might be less. What's your thought about that?
It's a really fun way to think about it.
It's a new spin.
A couple of different trains of thought. First, the early college was originally aimed at students who were unlikely to finish high school. Texas implemented early college as very different and in a more rigorous way than other states. And so that's what's gotten us to this place where we have this platform that's really pretty incredible. 108 campuses that are getting the kind of results that I shared earlier. So if you think about it in that way, Dr. Faulkner, if someone is going to likely at risk of being dropped out of high school, then it's more education. Because, statistically, the students that we were targeting probably weren't going to finish high school, much less enroll in post-secondary education. Second train of thought. Is American history in high school and American history in college that different? And is getting a double dip, two sheep dips? I have an ag background, so going through the vat twice is so what is not that you can't certainly if you're a history major you probably should, but how different is the high school experience from the college experience, and can the college dual credit course satisfy what you would have learned in high school? And then the third train of thought is kind of where you ended, or what you embedded in your comments with the student affairs background that I have. When we set GTF Scholars up, we were basing it on the El Paso experience, which was early in the time, but you have students finishing in 2 years at UT El Paso, and so we thought, well, that's just going to be the norm. And certainly the students are doing well, and we'll have a large number of GTF scholars graduate in their third year from those 4 universities. Most of the first cohort of students will graduate in 3 years or less. But as we've gone around and talked to the students, some of them could have graduated in 2 years from a university. And they're all of the students in GTF scholars are first-generation students. That's kind of the way the program's set up. They just discovered they really liked the university. And one student that I'm recalling at the University of Houston, she's discovered she's a pretty good rock climber. And she's on the rock climbing team, and she wants to climb rocks one more year. And so, on the one hand, I know that time is the enemy, and the longer it takes for students that we're interested in to graduate, statistically the less likely they are to graduate. But as a student affairs practitioner and going back to those leadership development days, I know that the experience that student is having on the university is rich and fulfilling, and it's exactly what you would want to happen for her or the other student that picked up photography and loves it. And the reasons go on and on and on. So sometimes it's curricular, why students are extending out into a third year. Sometimes it's they're getting that benefit, what happens at a university, and I think maybe can only happen at a university. And it's something that's totally unique to their family as first-generation college goers. So what started out as originally a 2-year scholarship model, we've come back and amended, and now it's a 3-year model. So we're providing scholarship supports, and our partner institutions are providing the non-financial supports that we ask them to provide, and building the financial aid packages using all the aid available to support the students for through 3 years. Because we decided that we like that plan, a 3-year plan. 3-year graduation rates are okay. And so I think it's, for me, it wasn't so much the less education, because again, the original intent was aimed at students who probably weren't going to finish high school, but it's that the education is beyond the classroom, and allowing the students to experience the university and all that it offers is really important. And maturing. And the other thing I'd say is, sorry, Commissioner, the other thing I'd say is, 4 of those 6 students that graduated from UTEP are in graduate school right now. When we visit with students, those students that we first talked to in El Paso, we were in a focus group with them with 13 students, and they were all, were they still in high school or having just finished high school. I said, so how many of you are thinking about graduate or professional school? And they looked at me with these funny looks, and I thought, oh, I've asked a question that's sensitive. Well, they thought I was an idiot, because all of them are thinking about graduate and professional school, these students that were first-generation college students. So they're going to get more education, Dr. Faulkner. I think, again, this is a pathway that reduces time to degree and debt, not only through the undergraduate credential, but also in some cases through graduate school.
But you said you started as a skeptic and you've been converted. I'm the same story. Why did you didn't say why you changed?
I'm a missionary for early college and dual credit.
Yeah. Yes, Dr. Paredes.
I want to ask a question. I want to make a point. I noticed in the video when that young man that was admitted to Stanford, I think I heard right that he was admitted as a freshman.
Correct.
What happened to all those dual credit, college credits he was accumulating?
So herein lies one of the interesting things we've discovered through GTF scholars and really digging in on this. Students are coming out of early college are not really freshmen, and they're not really juniors. And so what they call themselves and what the students actually understand themselves about what they are and their academic standing varies. So he says he's admitted as a freshman. I'm not sure. I don't know how his hours transferred. We did we tracked him down enough to verify that he's enrolled at Stanford. It would be interesting to know, going to an out-of-state institution, how things transferred. I'd come back to his personal story, though, and not that there aren't students from Canutillo who are admitted to highly rigorous programs, but that he's at Stanford in a pre-med program. The rigor of the high school experience may have been what had gotten him there, regardless of the credits applying. I'm just not sure.
The comment I was going to make is I was a skeptic. I'm encouraged, but I'm not sure I'm converted. I don't think we have enough longitudinal data to say conclusively that we know that these schools provide the level of rigor that we hope that they do. I was talking to David offline a moment ago, thinking that maybe it's time for us to do a study and to look at these issues in detail. I can say this: the comment that you made about is there raising the question about whether there's much difference between high school class and university or higher education class. I can tell you that when I worked with high school English teachers in Los Angeles Unified, when I was an English professor at UCLA, there was a huge difference. They weren't remotely comparable. In fact, I used to tell my students who would take an introductory survey course in American literature, they'd say, we're going to read Huckleberry Finn. I read that in high school. I said, we're going to really read it this time. There was a huge difference. Yeah. And I don't have any reason to expect that that's changed much.
Yeah. Yes, sir. And so in that way, I think following that line of reason, the class offered for post-secondary credit would be more education. Yeah. So I'm not saying they're equivalent.
Wynn, I'd like to ask you one question about a data point to make sure I fully understood what you said. I think as far as the early college, high school students that were going on to higher education, you had an enrollment rate at about 71%.
71% enroll immediately.
Enrolled immediately. But so my point really was on those that did not enroll, the other 29%. I think you said their graduation rate, it was like 1%.
I was mixing statistics. So the students out of early college high school, 71% are enrolling directly into higher education. In general, from other things that we've done, students who don't enroll immediately after high school into higher ed have about a 1% chance of finishing a credential within 6 years of graduating from high school.
And I've seen some other data. I've never seen it quite that low, but I mean, that's pretty, I mean, that sends a big, huge message that you've got a moment in time and from an institutional standpoint to help influence a decision. And if that decision is not to enroll, the chances of a successful outcome as far as post-secondary attainment is almost zero. I mean, I haven't seen it that. I mean, I've seen like 5% or something, but I mean, that's a pretty, I don't know how you try to deal with that issue of trying to and of course, getting them engaged and not being college ready also is not an answer as well, because you'll spend resources and you're not necessarily going to move the needle as well. But
I think it goes back to when Dr. Serrato was here. He probably told you there's no such thing as silver bullets. He likes the phrase silver buckshot. So So within education philanthropy, we tend to niche ourselves around being focused on post-secondary education or being focused on middle school, out-of-school time, math and science, or early childhood and reading by the third grade. All of those things are important. But none of them alone is the silver bullet. So we have to do a lot of things right from birth through the workforce and through career transitions. And we tend to think about things. That's why I said early college is not a panacea, nor is dual credit. There are two things that are effective strategies. I believe the evidence that we have is compelling. The commissioner wants more. That's completely reasonable. But they're not everything. And so for the students that come from these very structured environments, if we had pathways that were available to them so that there were on-ramps clearly out of high school into post-secondary credentials, whether they be certificates, associate's degrees, or baccalaureates, those would, I think, be helpful in this direct enrollment rate. But the problem is it's so easy right now to escape and to let something interrupt you, to not complete the FAFSA for whatever reason, just not get your applications done for some reason, to show up the day after classes start at the community college and there's not late registration, which is an appropriate requirement that you register on time and start classes on time. Just reason after reason, and there are probably as much variation in reasons as there is variation in human beings. But I think what's clear is we know if they are on the pathway, they're much less likely to achieve. And if it's 1% or 5%, it's still dramatically low.
Right. Okay, one more question. Yeah, Shirley.
Raymond, I'm going to try to convert you. I want to convert you. I really hope you can all understand the high schools we attended, they're not the same high schools today, thank goodness. If we didn't have the rigor, if we weren't continuing to raise the bar, we wouldn't be having more students, black, brown, white, male, female, taking ACT, SAT, taking AP, taking dual credit. The rigor is there. The partnership is there. We're doing the vertical teaming. We do have articulation agreements. Pub ed and higher ed folks are talking together, mostly through vertical teaming. And what starts the dialogue, I think, are the dual credit courses. It's amazing the transition a kid makes when they walk on that college campus and take a class. It's amazing, and they want more and more of that. Your presentation is superb. It just motivates me, and I hope it sends a message. High schools have changed for the better. We're not where we need to be until we have 100% graduation rate and 100% ready for college readiness or career readiness, whichever post-secondary route they take. But I think the time is right. I think we're there, we're ready, and if we can just continue those articulation agreements, it's different for Stanford. If it were a Texas school, I can assure you that kid would walk in as a sophomore. Now, they may have to call them something else till they get there, but we have good articulation agreements from my experience from a 5A high school and a 4A high school.
Thank you, Wynn. We certainly appreciate your time this morning. It's been very helpful to the committee.
Glad to, Mr. Hunt. Thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. And now I'd like to continue our discussion by introducing Dr. Lawrence Abel. Lawrence Abel's experience includes service as department chair for biological science, dean of arts and science, and provost. Since 1994, he has directed and continues to direct the Institute for Academic Leadership, providing training for department chairs throughout the State University system of Florida. While provost, he focused on improving retention and graduation rates and reached these conclusions. Retention and graduation rates can be increased with strong commitment, data-driven actions, and focused attention to details. A guided pathway to success approach yielded significant improvements in retention and graduation. This approach consisted of requiring early declaration of a major or an area of interest, a 4-year academic map for each major, milestone courses, intrusive advising, and limiting the number of milestone courses that can be taken. He's a native of Baltimore, Maryland, grew up in Miami, received his Bachelor of Science and Master of Science degrees in biology from Florida State University and his PhD in biological oceanography from the University of Miami. He was a postdoctoral fellow with the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute in the Republic of Panama. And so I'd like to welcome Dr. Lawrence Abel.
Thank you so much, and what a fascinating discussion. It may not have been 30 years ago, but I can tell you 20 years ago, we were looking at transcripts trying to figure out what courses did not transfer and what courses did. Became provost in 1994, and like anyone who's gone into academic administration, I had daily shocks and surprises. I thought if we admitted students, we thought they had the skills to graduate, and if they didn't, we were compelled to provide what they did need. And our graduation rate was around 58%, which when I complained about it, I was told, well, it's 14% higher than the national average. And I said, well, the national average is the national embarrassment, and what are we going to do about it? I became, depending on who you ask on campus, either interested in or psychotically obsessed with data. I followed students through orientation, through registration. I read thousands of transcripts. I looked at grade distributions, everything I possibly could, trying to figure out how to improve student success. Now, and as we've heard, there is no silver bullet. However, the closest you can come out of the 15 randomized controlled experiments I did, this gave us the largest return. It is the cheapest, highest return on investment you can do. I'm not going to repeat what you've already heard, but one of the things that surprised me was excess hours. I was not prepared. I just asked a simple question. How many students are going to graduate next month? Because we wanted to keep graduation rate under the time under 2.5 hours and still have every kid walk across the stage. And they said, well, we haven't run those numbers yet. And I said, well, just give me a run of every student with over 120 hours, and I'll use that as a proxy. Well, they gave me 7,382 names of our 25,000 students. Only 3,800 of those were eligible to graduate. I can't tell you what a shock that was. And the other shock was, we all talk about inequality, but I don't think we understand how rapidly that has changed. 20 years ago, between the poorest students of the families and the richest, there was about a 6-fold difference in college graduation. It's more than 10 times different today. That is unsustainable. Further, you already heard about, if you look at this chart and you realize that on the right-hand side of that graph in the United States, that's only about 24 to 26% of the population. You then look and even give them 60% degrees, we are going to go backwards. We are going backwards. We were number one for a long time in educational attainment of the next generation, and the report OECD released about 2 months ago, we're 14th. We have to address the lack of completion in certificates, community colleges, and universities. I can tell you institutional policies have a huge effect on graduation rates. You can look at that and take, say, a 75% first to second year retention, and you'll see campuses that graduate 25 or 50%, a twofold difference in graduation rates. And I promise you, it is institutional policies alone. You can do all kinds of analyses, but nothing drives that more than how that institution behaves and treats students. You would think in Florida, where we have common course numbering, common prerequisites, common transfer, that we would not have an excess hour issue. This is the graduating class in 2011, about 54,000 students. There are well over 1 million excess hours at a cost of $212 million to the students alone and about $280 million to the state. All excess hours that did not move toward graduation. You can take any random sample. Some people say, well, it's the community college students or it's the dual enrollment. It's not. It's everybody. This is a random sample from 2012 of students on campus. 120 to 254, 260 hours. That's very common. You can find this on any campus in the country, four-year campus. It'll be the same. If you look at why they had those excess hours, about 30 to 40% are WDF courses. And it would not surprise you to know that those courses are predominantly in the sciences. And I think that is our fault. We're not looking at the grade distributions in pre-calculus and calculus and asking, can we make this better? I can tell you that a C in pre-calculus may as well be an F, because only about 15% of students who make a C in pre-calculus will actually pass the next calculus course. Huge difference in grade distributions. And all of it is, I think, data-driven. We don't look at the data. I couldn't tell you what the excess hours were from changing a major. That's because some schools required a major at 30 hours, 45 hours, all the way up to 90 hours. So there's no way to compare it. My personal experience in looking at a ton of transcripts is that 30 hours, your 45 hours is way too long. I promise you, you're going to end up with excess hours. So why do students drift? You ever tried to read a university catalog? I mean, really, they're incomprehensible. And that, I don't mean that as a joke. Your general education requirements have cleaned up with the core. However, if you look at 3 of the areas, between 30 and 40 different courses on different campuses can be used to fulfill those. And how does a student know which one of those is the right one to transfer to another university if you're at a 2-year institution? So common that you can't enroll in the class you need. Particularly in the sciences, it seems that mathematics, physics, and chemistry are frequently offered at the same time of day, preventing a student from graduating on time. And of course, you've talked about the not understanding common prerequisites. This is from a typical catalog. 36 hours general education. There's it goes on several pages, about 600 courses. That is very, very common around the country. And you're going to expect an 18-year-old to sort through this and figure this out. When I visit campuses, I probably visit about maybe 80 in the last couple of years. I like to meet with students and say, from your perspective, how's it going? And they often say, well, we register in pairs, one to figure out what the code is, like ADA 400, and the other to look it up so we can register together. You got to find a way. Students, 18-year-olds especially, and don't forget, 88% of students on 4-year campuses are under 20, and 74% of students on community college campuses are under 20. These are young people. It's a misconception that community colleges have older students. They do, but the vast majority are still under 20 years old. We tried lots of different things. I tried measuring, are we offering the classes they needed when they needed it? What did we need to do? and we decided that academic maps was the answer. And the nice thing about academic maps, and I don't mean this disparagingly because I was a faculty member, if someone had come to me as either a faculty member or a chair and said, we would want to develop a 4-year plan of study for all the biology majors, I would have said one of two things: do it yourself, I'm too busy, or we would have had a faculty meeting and revised the curriculum and 3 years later still be discussing it. The easiest thing to do, and it's what we did, is we just took the catalog, we took what the faculty have already done, and just translated it into a term-by-term 4-year graduation plan. We sent it back to the faculty and said, this is what you said in the catalog. Did we get it right? If so, initial it and send it back. If not, you have 10 days to change it. After 10 days, we're assuming it's approved because we're publishing this for next year. I would say 99.9% of the time they signed off on it, because all we did, and we had staff and myself do it, was take the catalog and translate it. So what did we do? We had a lot of debates about how to do this, and there's lots of models that I'll show you. We decided to start out, how do you read this academic map? What are you supposed to take? So then we list not only the course code, but the course title and hours, term by term, what you need to graduate. For each term, there is one course, generally, or one action that must be completed that term to graduate in 4 years. And we call them milestone courses. Some people call them progression. Some people call them critical courses. But you have to have those courses and know they're offered with enough seats at the right time for every student. And of course, everybody wants to know about jobs, and so we link it to oldstar.net, the Handbook of Occupational Status at the Bureau of Labor, and several other sites. So how to read it, what you take term by term to graduate in 4 years, what you must take that term. And here's where a lot of people will debate. The first campus that worked on this said, if you don't take that milestone course in the term that is required, you change majors or change schools. Our faculty would have never approved that. I figured I'll start asking for one and hope for two. And that's what we got. You get 2 chances to come in. If you don't complete, say, if you're an accounting major, if you don't complete calculus, first semester sophomore year, you get 2 shots at it, and then you change majors. Otherwise, the student's going to drift and drift and drift. This is from San Antonio. It's got the core issues of a map. It's got the core listed, but it doesn't have milestones, and it really doesn't tell students how important it is to stay on this map. So a lot of the work is done, just a matter of translating it. Sinclair Community College decided that the general ed are too complicated. So every department selected one course for their core. So for economics, I think it was political science. There's no other option. The student, if you look at the bottom, and it's kind of fun if you do this, you click on it. If you accept map, what happens, pop up on the right-hand side, the list of all the courses you've accepted, open sections. If you select modify map, a red triangle comes up and says you're about to make a big mistake. Do you really want to stay in college longer? Because that's what's going to happen, and you need to come back and see me. There is no flexibility in there, and they're improving their graduation rate every single term. Florida International, a key to this, of course, is getting a major or area of interest early on. Florida International, in the center dot, choose me, that is a commercial product, Cooter.com. The student must go through that area of interest, assessment of skills, before they can register. Well, it takes about, if I do it, it takes me about 25 minutes. If you look at the IT people at Florida International, the students are through it in about 12 minutes. But at least they go through it. Then they have to pick a major or an area of interest. And at Florida International, they list if is it a common prerequisite, is it a common core, or a milestone. And you can do this if you want to drive your IR people crazy. You can do this with an Excel spreadsheet and say, what grade do you need in Accounting 1 to graduate with an accounting degree, if that's your choice? And the answer is a B. You have over an 80% chance if you make a B in Accounting 1, 15% chance if you make a C. And Florida International, a lot of schools are listing that. And think about the value to students when you walk into class. If I'm teaching the class, this is a foundational class. Everything you need is going to be presented here. You need to get a B in order to graduate in your field of choice. When you talked about transfer, Chipola College has for every single major a 2-year plan that is guaranteed to transfer every single course in your field of study, and you enter that school as a junior expecting to graduate in 2 years. In Florida, we have a lot of interactions and cooperations among schools by law. It's not by friendly fire. We may have to meet every 7 years and by discipline and review all of the courses and get agreement on what will transfer into every major and how it's going to be counted, whether a general education course or like in the sciences, as already you mentioned, the mathematics is both a core and a final. At Lehman College in New York, the student comes in and they have to choose an area. There's 32 areas they can choose from, nursing, accounting. When they choose that area, click, they're registered. They've got all of the classes that they're going to take that first term. And then it's an iterative process depending on how they do. Then they get their second term and third term. One of the things that shocked me was the low graduation rate from community colleges, especially when so many of the students come in saying they want a baccalaureate. Well, when Michael Bloomberg was mayor of New York, he said, why are we graduating so few students? And there was a lot of things. Our students are older, our students work. In fact, our students are part-time. Only 9% of community college students are exclusively part-time. That is, they take under 12 hours every term. 67% bounce back and forth, and the remainder go to school full-time. Why do you bounce back and forth? Well, it's because of employment. I was interested in getting our students to take 15 hours, and why do you hire student advisors? Because they're nice people, they care about students. I said, I want them to take 15 hours, and the whining started. Oh gosh, our students, they all work, they have all these responsibilities. That is a testable hypothesis. So I took our data down to the Labor Department, said, okay, how many students work and how many hours? I was hoping I could get individual data, but they wouldn't give it to me, but they would cluster it. And in fact, stunningly, 60% of our freshmen did not work at all. And if you believe the U.S. Census Bureau, that's not far off from national data at 2- and 4-year schools. So you say, well, what's preventing you from taking these classes full-time rather than part-time, whether it's a 2-year school or a 4-year? It's because classes are offered at the convenience of faculty, not when the students need it. So Bloomberg said, I'll tell you what, I'll pay for 5,000 students to go through a program that they come in and they must go full-time every single term, but they will know ahead of time all of their classes will be block scheduled. So this is one for business. All of the classes are in the morning, all 2 years for their attendance there. They can go pick an afternoon block or an evening block, but they have to go full-time. This gets around the problem that I saw and a lot of other people have seen. I interviewed our top employers in town, and their overwhelming was, could you just get their schedule straight so I don't have to move these? I love hiring college students, but every term I've got to shuffle everything around. I don't think our campus would ever go for block scheduling, but I think it's almost It's so important for local community colleges to take a look. And here are the results. This is not a trivial sample. This is almost 5,000 students. You look at students who came in needing 2 or more remedial courses versus students who came in fully proficient or clustered. And look at in 3 years, the graduation rate doubled. And if you look at economic literature, the return on investment is incredibly high. They invested X amount of dollars and they got back X times some factor. And there's, I can give you references if you want to see what the investment return is. It's so easy to make meta-major maps. That is, I don't know what area of business, but I want to major in business. Business is almost lockstep. Every student can come in, and every course on that map right there will lead them to a business degree and count toward graduation. Even in public safety, which is not structured at all, there is enough structure, if you look at national degree plans, that you can build it for criminology, public safety as a meta-major map. And I like to put them all together where you can compare them so the student can compare them. This is just our website. You can click on M for map, C for your learning compact, what you're supposed to know when you finish that degree. Here's another huge advantage. Okay, I know now how many students are coming in, what the milestone course is term by term. I know the pass rate for that. I now know how many seats I need in every single course on campus, and I can schedule classrooms and faculty to meet those needs. It's no more last minute doing this or last minute doing that, and you avoid the problem of conflicts, which is very common because you know how many seats you need, how many students are in every program, and how they're moving through the system. However, if you don't have the policies, you may as well not bother. I tried it with just handing out the academic maps to students, and it had no effect whatsoever. Only when we said you must have an area of interest by the end of the first term, a major by 30 hours, and the university had to commit to offering those milestone courses when they were needed, in the sequence they were needed. The advisors had to offer choosing a major workshops, and there's a ton of models out there. All student progress was monitored. If you missed a milestone course once, you had to physically meet with an advisor. You couldn't do it electronically. Twice, you had to change majors. And again, you can use software that you can purchase, or you can brute force it with a good Excel spreadsheet. And say to that student, okay, I know your high school GPA, your standardized exam, what you've taken. Students who look like you have great success in these 5 different majors. I was afraid that it was going to narrow it down and we were going to put everyone in this program we have called Interdisciplinary Social Sciences. You give me 120 hours and I'll give you a degree. Yeah. But it didn't. It's a very powerful system to guide that student. What I found over and over again, Group 1, they continued to take classes and just brute force, I'm going to pass this calculus or accounting over and over. No, they're not. They're never going to pass it. If they didn't pass it twice, nothing's going to happen. If they're that committed, let them go somewhere else and try it. But it's just wrong. I felt it was morally wrong to allow them to try and try and try and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars over time. Plus, when you have these maps, you're communicating to everybody, to parents, students, faculty. Graduation is a 4-year process on our campus. This is your map to get out in 4 years. They're integrated into every aspect at orientation. Parents, grandparents, everybody who's there has an academic map appropriate to their either area of interest or degree. Students save time and money. This was the biggest shock to me. In 2000, we started in 1998-99. In 2000 was the first year before we had full sets of maps. We had, as you see, 7,300 students with over 120 hours and more than one term from graduating, and a 44.2% 4-year graduation rate. 9 years later, because nothing happens fast in higher education, it's cut down to 1,500 and a 17% increase in 4-year graduation rates. Think about the millions of dollars moving from 6 years to 4 years saved. And one of the wonderful things is almost 3,000 students earned a degree in that period that otherwise would not have graduated in the past. It's an incredible. I already mentioned all of this, and I thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we go to questions for Dr. Abel, is one data point for everybody to remember. In Texas, 100,000 of public and private resources, state appropriations, tuition, institutional funds will buy you 1.8 degrees, and that's both community college and 4-year, both research and regional. In Florida, that same 100,000 will buy you 3 degrees. So I think, to me, and there could be other nuances in there, but I think it's a strong statement that we've got a lot of potential in following some of what has been laid out here today to make us much more productive. So.
When I was a faculty member, I taught an array of courses in biology, and when we were told to go to Common Course numbering, I guess I'm embarrassed by it. I thought, that's a stupid. In the first place, my course is so good, how could anyone else have a course as good? Yeah. Therefore, we can't have Common Course numbering. However, when I became a provost and saw that we had 6,000 and 7,000 students migrating around, and not having Common Course numbering without it would have killed those students. So now in Indiana and Florida, and it's being considered in Tennessee and Illinois, a student coming in must have a meta-major map by area of interest, or if it's a 4-year school, 4-year plan to graduate in 4 years. It's a wonderful thing. I think Common Course numbering and common prerequisites are one of the reasons, and an important one, that graduation rate cost is different.
Yes, Jerry?
What are we doing in Texas on this? I don't know. What are we doing in Texas on this at various institutions and as a regulatory requirement?
Well, we've already mentioned some of them. So we have the core curriculum completers. We have the field of study guides, which is a limited number of areas. There is a Common Course numbering system, voluntary. It's not, in law, and there's a real cost to the conversion, and I think that has to be taken into account because you have thousands of courses. So I think it's more accomplished. It's something that can be accomplished if one gives institutions at least enough time to do it in a systematic kind of way, because it trails over to transcripts and all kinds of other things. And that part usually isn't discussed. I think that has to be done. I think that Florida has been discussed, but the piece, it's usually from the end of what the universities have to do, not that bottom piece, in terms of the meta major. And I think that we have some community colleges in Texas that are moving towards that, Alamo Community College being one. I think Austin may be moving that direction, but I'm sitting here thinking, actually, as we're talking about redoing our field of study guides and the core, that maybe we have done a voluntary transfer compact in terms of business. Maybe we could start our field of study work differently with business and try to, and this is just off the top of my head, but try to focus on that, because it's one area which is a major transfer area and a major area for graduates. And because the accrediting associations have so many things firmly in place, there's probably a great deal more common ground to begin there. So I think we haven't talked about that. This is the first Raymond has heard me say this, because I've just been thinking in the last 2 minutes. But I think that part of what we need to accomplish in your efforts is to address this transfer issue and make sure it's done in a rigorous kind of way, and I think it can be done.
And what about predicting?
Get off the mark. We've been sort of wandering around in the woods for about 10 years now.
I would have never said this as a faculty member, and if there are faculty members here, they'll probably hate me, but I came to separate academic freedom and determining what is in the course, what courses are appropriate to the degree, and what are administrative responsibilities to the student. I don't think we would have had anywhere near the success without statutory requirement that we do it. It just would not have happened. I taught for over 30 years at several institutions. We would have never come together to solve these problems without statutory requirement for Common Course numbers. If you look at the, back to that one slide on sources, there's a lot of courses. I think almost 50% of courses that did not transfer because the student didn't know. We're expecting these students to sort through way too much. Go to some private school catalogs. There's very little flexibility there. I mean, I became guardian of a 16-year-old, and I can't wait to get him off to college. I've discovered two things. That financial aid, that's not complicated enough. It's incomprehensible. And the second is private schools don't offer all these options. You know, you're coming in, what's your area, and here's your, the two I've visited 4 now. It's all 16 hours, 4 4-hour classes per term, and we will be happy to not give you a decision, and we're only going to charge you $52,000 a year for that.
I have exactly that same experience. In addition to academic freedom, one issue that comes up, and Wynn and I were in a conversation just a couple of weeks ago in which a faculty mentioned the concern about students being able to explore. And that comes up, and I think many of us believe that within the current curriculum there's plenty of opportunity to explore. But part of the result of your education should be the ability to explore on your own later.
They're not exploring, they're lost. Look at transcripts. I'm serious. Look at transcripts. They are lost.
Exploring isn't
yes, Bob.
I wanted to make a comment about mapping, and I think I think there's more mapping going on than you imply. And 30 years ago, when I was a chemical engineering department chair, I knew exactly when every class was being taught, where it was being taught, and how it fit into our curriculum. And if the math department decided they were going to change differential equations and teach it an hour later, and it interfered with our thermodynamics course, I would go over there and hassle them and say, hey, no, wait, this is not things. And every student had that map, had it in front of them, and said, look, if you don't take these courses in this particular sequence in here, you're going to be on and off a year. So you doggone well better do it. So I think mapping has been around a lot.
Yeah, a long time. But I only looked at about 8 universities and 4-year schools in Texas, and I did not find a lot of clarity. That one from San Antonio, they had some others had some, but my experience is that the student, there has to be some guidelines on that student. They don't do well on their own. They need some penalties and people looking over their shoulder.
Bernie?
Thank you, Woody. I just want to, on behalf of taxpayers and parents, and I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for what, I mean, I suspect, my Verizon bill, AT&T bill, the complication makes money for the companies, so they're not motivated to make it clear to me, and I've often suspected that the same was going on at the university level, so I just want to say thank you.
You're welcome.
I'd like one quick question, Dr. Abel, on the predictive analytics. How is that received? I mean, kind of over this whole issue of resource allocation is kind of, individual freedom to go waste your time and public resources at the same time, but we're giving people that flexibility to find out who they can be. And you take it to the next step with predictive analytics, where you're saying, you really shouldn't go down this path. If your grade level is here, we're telling you're not going to be able to make it. So it's a little bit of that, different than the American ideal that if you keep struggling, you might get there, and you might spend a lot of public resources on that low possibility bet.
if our graduation rate nationally at the same institution wasn't 46%, why don't we deal with that embarrassment first, and let's get them out of school in an appropriate period of time. You don't force them to choose another major. You're just saying, well, we do if you've done twice. Yeah. But early on, you're saying the chances of you graduating in this major are pretty low. So you're going to have to really buckle down and work hard if you want to stay in this major. Or, if you've done it twice, we say, okay, we have a community college right up the street, great relationships. Student can go there and retake Accounting 1 and Calculus, and if they make a B or better, we let them back into that major. But otherwise, I don't think we realize the billions and billions of dollars nationally that are being spent by taxpayers and students without a credential. And as on one of the charts hanging up outside when I walked in, it's the credential that makes the difference. Whether that's right or wrong, it's the credential that makes that difference, and they are not getting a credential.
David, anything to say about that as far as where we are in this state, or any institutions using predictive?
Well, actually, one of the top people, I'm blanking on his name, has actually just become a faculty member at UT Arlington. In fact, there's a very good edX course available online that you can audit if you'd like. But I think this is being explored. I know at UT Austin, I know that we have a group of institutions working on early alert systems that we're helping to fund around the state. I've forgotten how many institutions. So I think this is a new area for institutions, but they're beginning to look at it. I know that some schools have been able to identify in certain key courses how to identify students before they fail the course, to provide them some assistance. But I think we're really in the beginning stages of this, but it's something that I think is helpful. But I think an important note is you're giving the student good information and they can still make a decision. We actually had a former member of our board who was at a community college, and the counselor essentially said, you've dug a hole if you want to do this, but it was realistic. If you want to achieve, this is what you do. Right. And I've always remembered that. So that was a very good advisor, but you've got to be realistic. We know that in developmental ed, if you start at a certain level in developmental ed, your odds of graduating are very small.
Well, as we look at our goals, for this committee looks at our goals, and we're looking at completion rates at a time in the future, we're looking at student debt upon graduation. We really haven't talked about having a goal as far as cost per degree. And obviously you've got to have some inflation-adjusted target, but I'm not sure, because that data is available and it's available on a national basis, whether something like that, given the fact that we're trying to put together a document that will get legislative support, whether a productivity goal in terms of cost resources allocated per degree might be appropriate. So I just throw that out as
I would suggest that you start with your student debt goal and look at that as a target for that goal. But I think today, between both presenters, you've heard a number of things that actually are suggesting some potentially very good strategies to achieve your goals, aside from the goals themselves. So I think you can talk about that this later today.
Lionel?
Yes, Dr. Abel, I really do congratulate you for this amazing attempt to communicate to 18-year-olds, because actually an 18-year-old, in fact a 12-year-old, can navigate through almost anything. It's not that they can't do it, it's just that we are talking the way that we talked 20 and 30 years ago, and we expect them to communicate the way we used to communicate. And people are communicating differently, and I don't know that I think what we need to do as a whole is understand how 18-year-olds get their information and make it as interesting for them to navigate through the most complicated decisions can be made if they are made in the form of entertainment, in the form of games, in the form of what they like to do. And I think exploring that and just getting away from what we've done is a very difficult thing to do. But if we were to somehow be able to always be in front of the way young people are getting that information, because the way they're getting it today is going to be different from the way they're going to be getting it 5 years from now. So we need to be thinking about this ever-changing world of communicating effectively, what media to use and what tools to use. And I think you're on the forefront of accomplishing a lot of that. So thank you.
Yes, Raymond.
One place to start to deal with this issue, I wonder if Professor Abel would comment on this, is if you look at the data in Texas compared to national data, for example, the number of hours typically accumulated to achieve a baccalaureate degree in Texas is about 147. The national average is about 136. If you look at community colleges, the average number of hours accumulated to earn an associate's degree in Texas is about 95 or 96. Nationally, it's 67 or 68. That's an obvious place where we could make some recommendations that would drive that number down and lower the cost of a degree substantially. But those numbers for Texas are completely out of whack compared to national averages.
And I'd like to call your attention for your discussion this afternoon on student debt. Your target number 4 actually addresses that point. You may want to shape it in a different kind of way, but if you look at that.
Yes, Shirley.
Very quickly. Just, Mike, I love the MAP program. It would be wonderful if it was mandatory and it was statutory. It works. And if you want that seamless transition we talk about all the time, we have block scheduling in our high schools. It works very, very well. A kid could do very well with a block schedule for their meta major. It would be a natural transition. So hats off to you for the block schedule concept and the MAP. Amazing.
None of these are my ideas. I steal them wherever I see them.
So do we.
And one I would say is get rid of remediation. If you look at the big study the Carnegie Foundation completed about 5 months ago, you look at Baltimore Community College, Austin P, every one of those programs has gotten rid of remediation and put the student in the first college class. Instead of a 3-hour class, it might be a 5-hour class. Some people charge for the extra hours, some don't. But the difference between putting them in a college class and putting them in remediation is about 8-fold in terms of success rates, and a lot of money saved.
Wow, that's profound.
Okay, I'd like to thank you, Dr. Abel, for a very interesting, and again to Dr. Rosser, and look forward to being able to continue to pick both of your all's brains as we put together our strategy for the next 2015 to 2030 for the state of Texas. So, thank you very much.
Good job. Great.
We've got a quick 15-minute break here, and then we're going to come back to do a working lunch.
Okay. Good.
So we can start again at 12. Now, the staff members of the coordinating board are going to lead us through the overview document. Staff members covering goals. We'll start with Susan Brown, Assistant Commissioner for Strategic Planning and Funding, and we'll discuss the possible goal of educational attainment.
Okay, you all have this document in your folder. It has all of has like a background, and then it has all of the different goals included in there. And so we're going to start with the educational attainment. And what we're doing is we're trying to pull, we had everybody break out last time and go over and come up with strategies and possible targets and that sort of thing. Now what we want to do is give everybody a chance to comment on those strategies and targets. And after what you heard this morning, there may be some changing of strategies. And so we wanted to give everybody a chance to weigh in on all of the goals at this point. And I'm going to start with educational attainment, which is the broad overarching goal that we have. added as possible targets, and you will see those are shaded and then underlined, some of them. And then you'll see strikeouts for things that we changed from last time, and the discussion was to delete those strategies or targets. And so you'll see that as we go through all of the goals. Basically, for the educational attainment, we wanted to add one by race and ethnicity, the educational attainment moving up by race and ethnicity, especially for the African American and Hispanic population. And I will say part of this is just highlighted because we actually, as of yesterday, got new population projection numbers from the Texas State Data Center. So those were updated as of yesterday. So we will start updating some of this as we move forward.
Susan, just for a second, I just want to make everybody on the committee aware what these goals that we're going over will be presented a week from Friday on the 21st at the convening of the Board of Regents, chancellors, and others involved in higher education, university presidents, at the Doubletree. And a number of our, including myself and a number of the committee members, will serve as either presenters or moderators around these goals. Some of the speakers that we've had already will be speaking at that time.
Correct.
So we need to come out of here with a consensus that we feel comfortable because this is going to be presented at least as a preliminary kind of a status report on where we are.
And our plan is that we will have this presented to them, and then we will get their feedback at that conference and bring it back to you at your next meeting so that you get input from all of those people.
Are we not doing gender this time? Or?
That was not a suggestion, but we can include that for sure.
I remember you have gender, and I'm trying to remember which one.
On the completion.
On the completion, on the 550,000 degrees in 2030. We've got those by ethnicity and by gender.
Right.
In fact, we've got intermediate goals between now and then on all of those bases. So.
And we will be doing that same thing we'll have the intermediate goals for the educational attainment also. And then obviously you wanted to add the by level, so we'll have the certificates, associates. Now the certificates will be a little challenging because the Census Bureau does not do educational attainment for certificate. It's some college. So we take data from the other places, and it's called the SIP survey, to get the certificates. And so we will be working on that.
Well, right now we have, correct me if I'm wrong, we have for our current 25 to 34, we're at roughly 34%. I think
Correct.
We're 33.9 based on the latest data. We've added 4% for certificates.
Right.
And that is internally generated coordinating board. Where does that 4% come from?
That comes from the SIP survey. It's the SIPP. It's a survey that's done. It's not done every 5 years. And so we're taking those national numbers on certificates and then looking at that. We also did some additional work looking at the number of certificates that Texas has awarded because in the population. And it from the data we have, it looked like it would probably be about the same. So we're using that national data and applying that to the certificates.
Right.
Let me just add one comment in terms of Kathy's question, is that when we get to the completion goal, we have much more detailed targets because that's something over which the institutions have more control. This first one is the general population, so you'll see twice as many targets, at least as a starting point.
Yeah, Susan, when we add the goals for race and ethnicity, would we expect those numbers to be different from the overall goal, higher or lower?
They will probably start out lower, and then if we want to do like we did for closing the gaps, and that's another question, we started out at a lower, like 5.7% of the population is where we got the participation goal from. They started out lower, and then by the end of the 15-year period, we wanted them to be the same. So we wanted that equity.
Okay.
So we will look at what it actually is and then kind of ramp it up at a faster rate.
If some are higher and lower, the ultimate goal would be the 52% for all ethnic groups, or would the ultimate?
That is all ethnic groups for 2020, and then 60% for the 2030.
So the ultimate target would be the same for all ethnic groups.
Correct.
But some of the intermediate targets
may be different.
Okay.
Yes.
And that's based on where we are today.
Yes.
Okay. We wouldn't be setting a higher or lower standard for different ethnic groups, is that right?
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
We would be setting the same 2030 standard for where we want to get, but if they're starting out quite a bit lower, then we will need to ramp them up at different rates.
Right. And I guess to remind the committee, based on the testimony we've taken, is going back to Dr. Schleicher from the OECD, and who has a 60% target by, I think, 2025 for the total population.
Correct.
So, I mean, they're giving, for the developed world, that's kind of their target. That's been adopted by the U.S. Department of Education, the current administration. We listened to the Georgetown workforce study, which is, I think, viewed as the best scholarly work done today. Their projection is all of the new jobs by 2020 are at 63%. For the 25 to 30, well, I don't know whether theirs is 25. They're just new jobs, 63%. For the country, 59% for Texas, which to me was kind of they were already kind of discounting what we could do, because why would our rate be lower than someone else other than we have less complex jobs that take less education. So, but those are the factors that we ended up essentially taking input on that led us to say, well, we're below the national average. We've got some challenges here. We're going to push it out 5 years to 2030. We're also going to focus on the 25 to 34-year-olds instead of looking at the total population. So essentially we've made two qualifiers there, which I think are realistic. So that was how we got to the 60%. And I think the next question was to ask, well, is that realistic? And I think that we need to be at 550,000 in new degrees, compounding. And of course, every year you're adding to that number, which you've laid out on how we're going to get there incrementally. But the question is 550,000, if that's the end point in 2030, is that realistic? And I noticed the compounding there is at 3.8%. And I was a little unclear over exactly what the base was, and I haven't run the math yet, but I will. And I think some data that could be helpful to the committee at a point in the future would be our compounding from 2000 to 2014 or whatever the most recent. That would. And the last time I ran it, we were at about 4.5% compounding. So we're asking ourselves if or what we're projecting forward is in line with what our historical, at least since closing the gaps in 2000 has been.
It is. It's actually slightly less given the different demographics.
Right.
But yes, we think that the 550,000 is actually very doable.
Right. And then my next question, and I maybe we're spilling over into the second goal here, and I apologize, is I think we need to do some of that same compounding on the different demographic groups, because they almost have to be. If you look at our goal for Hispanics, we want to be at 175,000 graduates by 2020. We're currently at 84,000. So, in other words,
I can get you all of that.
So that's a huge increase in the compounding, which at one point when you look at it, you say, well, wait a minute, I mean, how's that going to really work? But what's not there is the population change. So essentially what we need is a compounding that takes into consideration, or a projected compounding that takes into consideration, because you've got two components. You've got the population increase, and then you have the increase in degrees per capita. So we might have, as we're projecting, a declining Anglo population. So, for example, if the degree completion stayed flat for the Anglo population, that would imply an increasing degree per capita would still be taking place. So you still have an increased compounding there, even though the number of degrees don't go in one respect. So trying to understand that decomposition helps us keep testing, at least in my view, the reasonableness of saying we can get to 60% or 550,000 degrees completions by the 2030 date.
And we can bring that to the next committee. Paul's already run all of that. We'll just make it into it's in a basic Excel spreadsheet at this point. We'll make it pretty and bring it to you for the next meeting.
No.
So that's not a problem at all. If you look at some of the strategies, what we did is we looked at strategies across all of the other goals, the other 3 goals, and we said, okay, here are some of the things that we need to, they went across multiple goals, and so we pulled them out and put them in this one goal. So you're looking at some of those high impact practices and providing ABE, even though the adult basic ed is not geared mainly toward that 25 to 34, we need to not forget those people. We need to make sure that adult basic ed is available into, some of them may be those 25 to 34. Those people that don't go directly from high school into college, we still need them to have a pathway into higher ed. So we've got to be able to help them even if they dropped out of high school or, that sort of thing. We need to be able to help them get in and get credentials and to be able to be more productive in the workforce and more, have that ability to come in here.
What are the stats on how many are needing adult basic education right now?
I've heard things ranging from 3 million up to 5 to 6 million. I mean, they vary all over the place. We do have some programs in place called Accelerate Texas, where we're looking at trying to get more of those students, credentialed.
The last data I heard was 3 million.
Okay.
How many do we have out of that 3 million? How many do we have in adult basic education right now?
I would have to go find out. We'll get with TWC. We'll get numbers. Unfortunately, not as many as we need.
Yeah. Well, one of the things we've found recently from working with the Workforce Commission, the Texas Workforce Investment Council, and TEA is that there are many programs out there that aren't even connected. We don't even know what resources as a state are available. And one of the proposals from our plan with TWC and the other agencies is to develop a resource where we really know where all these students are, what resources are available, even for referral purposes, because that isn't known statewide. And so there's some shortfalls there. And actually, in terms of language, we probably ought to be talking about adult AEL, which is sort of the federal classification ranges from 1 to 6, and with 5 and 6 being students that are really developmental ed, and 1 and 2 being the folks that
we have limited resource allocation.
Uh-huh.
The state does not fund adult basic education except at the minimum for the federal math, period.
We agree.
California does them up. I don't see anything changing on that. And to me, for us to allocate resources to that population right now that's not being addressed, period, anywhere else, I mean, we don't need to forget them, but I wouldn't spend any time worrying about that as a cohort that we need to move up. The secondary ed is far more important.
Yeah, this is an important point, because what staff has here are strategies that they've gleaned from your discussions, and it's really important that if you have strategies, that they really be the key strategies, very strategic in terms of moving ahead. So one could make the case, as you just did, for the K-12 level, but also for the thousands of students we have that have accumulated 80, 90 hours towards a degree and haven't finished as well. So we have a huge state investment. You heard a little bit about that this morning in students that have started college but never finished. So
Which
there's
is not a
several-
part of adult basic education.
No,
They are not
It's
part of
a
adult basic ed.
There's another strategy there.
That's
Yes.
exactly right. They're a totally different kind of student.
Resource allocated has gone from TEA to the last session and went to Texas
PWC.
Workforce. Until you have better data, I don't see that as with limited resources where you're going to apply it. The state's not doing anything.
Should we have the Workforce Commission? Should we invite somebody from there to at least have a dialogue with our committee so we have some understanding on what their strategy is to deal with some number has to be added out of that population into our expectation for 2030.
We'll make sure and have somebody come. We can there's all sorts of people over there that we know that
Our
can
staff
come.
meets with the other agencies once a month.
But literally it is 100,000 out of 3 million plus. That's all we're touching.
Right, but I don't think it's our role. I mean, it's our role to come back and advise, and if that advice says for us to get to this target, we need X out of that population. I mean, it's up to the legislature to decide whether they want to support programs to do that or increase the funding. But at least it seems to me appropriate for us not to preclude that decision. We need to give them our best advice.
Shifted to the Texas Workforce Commission, which is now who's in charge. Although it's a partnership with TEA and higher ed,
Right.
But Texas Workforce now has the oversight. They only had it for one year.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying. I'm not sure we have
Or
a lot of time figuring that out.
Or potentially to target part of that group in terms of the federal definition, the group at the 5 and 6 level, which are very nearly, or at least close to college ready, but they're not there yet. So there are a lot of decisions you can make given that, and that would be a much smaller number of people.
But I wouldn't throw them under the adult basic education cohort, which tends to be a little bit older and others that you look at and we identify them from a population standpoint.
We all need to speak into our mics or it doesn't pick up the recording.
Okay, and the other strategy that was developed at the last meeting was to talk about increasing the efforts to promote the college attainment at an earlier age and to partner with, there's lots of groups out there already doing this, and to make sure that we have a coordinated effort in doing that, and not everybody going off on their own, speak with kind of one voice while we do that.
May I make a comment just about the goal itself? We're currently at 38%, and one of the targets is 45% by 2020. That's 5 years from now. So essentially, the bulk of the students that we hope to get 45% are starting now. How can we have such an effect on these students that are just starting right now to raise it from 38 to 45%? Do we think these strategies will get us there? I mean, that's a huge increase. And it's great to have lofty goals, but I just wonder if that's too lofty.
Well, you have to look at the educational attainment is not just us graduating. It's also people coming into the state. And with the jobs that we're creating now, a lot of those do have credentials in the high tech. So it's kind of that combination of things. And we have that 38% is from the 2013. So it's actually a 7-year time frame going out. And that's why that jump is a little bit higher there.
It just seems like a huge jump for those students, basically, that are starting now.
Well, and we're hoping that because a lot of those students are the ones that are either starting now or in high school now, that some of those things that we're doing to do the college prep and some of the things that we've been seeing grow might be helpful and kind of give us that jump start, because we're not starting at ground zero. There are a lot of programs in place.
It is a lofty goal.
It is a lofty goal. But if you don't try for a lofty goal, you will never get there.
Susan, the Texas Workforce Commission is the one neck to choke for adult basic education at this time, right?
Correct.
Okay. As a condition of receiving unemployment compensation, if you do not have a post-secondary credential, could you make that a condition of receiving unemployment compensation? That you at least begin the process. Is that too heavy-handed or what?
I think that would be a hard sell, I believe.
A hard sell.
Trying to be nice. I think that would be a little heavy-handed to say that in order to get unemployment benefits, you will have to either have a post-secondary credential or be working on one. Is that what I'm hearing from what you said?
Yes, that you begin the process. If you don't have a post-secondary credential, that if you want unemployment compensation, you have to start the process of acquiring a credential. Let the record read that I think. Let the record read that I think we're going to have to be pretty heavy-handed to accomplish these goals. Okay.
I think I know that I know TWC has a lot of things in place for retraining and that sort of thing.
That's what I'm thinking. That's why.
A lot of their retraining that they do is not necessarily does not necessarily lead to a post-secondary credential. They do some retraining into licensure programs that we do not collect the information on. So I do believe that they do a lot of, they'll do like from a Unix to a SQL, networking certificates, those kind of things that are not post-secondary credentials. Or they'll do a welding training that moves on to apprenticeship programs, those sort of things. So we don't capture all of the credentials being offered. So let's go with that is one issue.
Yeah, I sat on the North Central Texas Workforce Board for too many years, and they do play around the edges, but
they're not all post-secondary credentials.
Exactly. Maybe the next step is to go post-secondary. I don't know.
Okay.
Bernie, it's important to remember that we're not talking about just harvesting, if that's the right term, students that go to college out of high school. We're talking about recovering those young people who've accumulated 60, 90 hours of college credit but never finished a degree. We're working very close with the Texas Workforce Commission to provide particular opportunities to accelerate progress towards a credential for veterans. There's that College Credit for Heroes campaign that the Workforce Commission is behind. That will provide us another growing pool of potential college completers. So it's not just a conventional 18-year-old student graduating from high school and going on to a college or university. It's a whole bunch of other groups as well.
I think one thing you have to consider now, not many people have spoken on this, but should this be a strategy that we share at the governing board conference at this point? There seems to be enough concern. I think maybe you ought to talk about that for a minute. I think you might want to consider whether you want to have one targeted towards the thousands of people who have taken advantage of higher ed but haven't finished as yet, because there's many people, and there are other ways to do that, but I think you at least need to focus in on whether you want to take this forward for consideration at the governing board conference,
right.
Number 2.
Right. And, getting back to some of the points, I mean, in one sense, this is a stretch, but if you look at New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Jersey, add certificates, which are not most of the public, they're in the mid-50s to 60% right now. So when we say we can't get there in 15, 16 years from now to where essentially they are today, we're essentially, at least in my view, kind of making the statement that we can't compete because, without our natural resources, we would be facing that issue today. We're being buffered as long as the price of those resources, the world market stays very healthy. But without that, we've got a huge gap, and the only way to be competitive is to close that gap. So.
And we do have, under completion, we have one that talks about getting those students who have completed 50, 60 hours back in to complete a credential.
Yeah.
Just for clarification purposes, from the legislature standpoint, adult basic education is primarily undereducated people not in the workforce who never had their high school degree. We're not talking about anybody attaining any post-secondary hours. Adult basic ed, primarily in the mindset of the legislature, is simply people who do not have a high school degree or any training and are not employed, or employed very low, and we're trying to elevate it.
But a success there, I mean, I think the point the staff's trying to make, success in adult basic education can increase the supply of those that could go on to post-secondary attainment. Now, how big a number that might be, but if you're looking at 3 to 6 million people, and you have some success, then might not be an insignificant number when we're trying to hit this aggressive goal.
It also, all of our community colleges also have a lot of workforce training programs that are 9 to 15 semester credit hours for those marketable skills, or 15 up to, on up for certificate 1 and 2. Those are very definitely workforce related, and a lot of the ABE that is being offered currently is to get those students through some of those level 1 certificate programs.
And I have to say, we really shouldn't be talking adult basic ed, because it should be adult education learners, because adult basic ed is really the level 1 and 2, which is very different than what Dee is talking about. But the other folks are really what Raymond is talking about, and it's an important distinction, because the 5 and 6, to some extent, they're enrolling in community colleges right now in developmental ed. We've just been able to better identify them now. Yeah. And then the next group are the ones that are in the program called Accelerate Texas, where you're trying to get them to the 8th grade level, but with a certificate from community colleges, those that don't require college readiness, but get them in the workplace immediately at good paying jobs. So there's an important distinction there. It doesn't mean that you would ignore the 1 and 2, but what's the most fruitful area? But I didn't know this 7 months ago. It's something I've had to learn in terms of this whole area, and I think primarily because the state hasn't done very well in it.
I guess I'll have to adjust my recommendation from a post-secondary credential to a GED. How's that? I mean, if you're going to continually churn jobs because you don't have a proper level of education, can't we ask you to at least get a GED?
We've been working with TEA and the Workforce Commission to provide different pathways for adult learners who simply are interested in being able to qualify for a job that pays a living wage. And several years ago, we did a survey of employers around the state, and we asked a very simple question: what's the minimal level of educational attainment one needs in order to hold a job that pays a living wage? And we were told over and over again, 8th grade. Now, we're not talking about jobs that pay well, but we're talking about jobs that pay a living wage. And so we've been working to bring certain adult learners up to that level, because we have a lot of people in this state, over 25, who read at 2nd or 3rd grade level, or who are functionally illiterate, and we have to find a way to make them employable. So we've got that goal for a certain number of learners. We've got GED, which has been the traditional goal of adult basic education, as Shirley knows. And then we've got some programs in place at try to position young people or even older people in their 30s on a post-secondary credential track. So we're trying to develop all of these different pathways to make people employable and put them in a position where they can support their families. So GED, 8th grade level skills and so forth, we're trying to do all of that. But as Dee points out, in terms of adult learning, and I mean the whole range from basic education, basic literacy to GEDs and beyond, we simply don't have the resources.
Okay, let's move on. Julie Eklund is our Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Strategic Planning and Funding to discuss the goal of completion, which we've already got into a little bit.
Could I just clarify, so at this point,
yes, David.
You're okay with taking forward the second strategy in terms of the adult education to the Governing Board Conference?
We've had questions raised. I'm comfortable moving forward, but the will of the committee needs to be expressed if there's a difference of opinion.
Yeah. I just don't want to misrepresent the committee with the Governing Board. So if the committee's comfortable, we'll do that.
Okay, Julie.
Thank you. All right, we're moving on to our completion goal, and I think you'll see there's you'll see some of our targets and strategies that will also contribute to our attainment goal, and we've discussed that at various points that we want our completion goal to build towards that. Our completion goal is that by 2030 we'll have at least 550,000 students that complete a certificate, an associate, bachelor's, or a master's degree, and it's new to be including that master's degree compared to our Closing the Gaps success goal. When we look at the targets, and we have included on this our current completion status. Right now we have 291 students, and this is for 2013. And I think when we look at the target and how that has been ramped up in 2020 and 25, I think I'm too close to this, you'll see that we've built in for the 7 years from 2013 and on. So you'll see we have an increase to 380,000 students by 2020, and then 450,000 by 2025 for that's 70,000 additional, and then up to the 550 by 2030, the 100,000. So that was ramped up, but we had the 7 years. Now, when we have added here, because the group asked us to do it, and you'll see it's highlighted, a completion target for Hispanics and African American students. So we have that target is based on the targets in terms of the years. It's based on the first target for 2020, but for Hispanic students, and that 175,000 students represents looking at the population of Hispanic students and including that percent in terms of the completers. So where we are targeting to be for 2020 overall, that 175,000 students is the percent of the population that's being predicted for 2020 that will be Hispanic, and the same for 2025 and 2030. And as Susan said, we just got new population projections. Yes.
Right, yeah, and what I was trying to I guess, mention earlier is for the committee, so that we can feel comfortable with the projections, to understand the growth from 84,000 to 175,000 over 7 years. How much of that is attributable to pure population or demographic change in an absolute sense, and how much is an increasing completion rate, per whatever that population is?
Correct, and we'll provide you, as Susan said, we'll provide you some details. Right. We've got that background. So those are the first 3 targets, and again, those are I'm sorry.
Yeah, yes. I think when we look at the goal for Hispanics at the first 5 years, to me, is beyond aggressive. And if I'm not talking about the need, and I'm not talking about stretching. I just wonder if we're going to hit a brick wall, because if you just based it on percentages based on demographics, versus when we look at subdivisions of a population and we look at college readiness, when do we cross the line between trying to do the right thing for all the people in this state and just putting a number out there that is really tough. I mean, the one place where closing the gaps still is not meeting, am I correct? Still not meeting the goals is with the Hispanic population.
Let me clarify. In fact, we have exceeded our goal in terms of completers with Hispanics. We have not reached our goal in terms of participation. And that's the one thing that's encouraging. So the Hispanics that are enrolling are currently much more successful. And I think it's clear that we need to give you more background in how all these are calculated. But these students are already enrolled to a large extent that will help achieve this. And we're seeing increased, the one thing people don't like are graduation rates, but we're seeing improvements in graduation rates across the state. Even with increased numbers of students on Pell Grants and even with the increased numbers of first-time in college students. So we'll go back and look at this, but this is one area that's very encouraging. Is if we can get the participation up and maintain the same level of completions, we should be in good shape. It's not to say it's easy, but we have to achieve this if we're going to be successful.
And I think with the committee, David, to feel comfortable with the conclusions, we need to have our demographic projection that shows us the expected population of Hispanics in that age range at that time, and then take a look at the completion rate and see how that's in line with the historical completion rate and the improvement in that rate. And if it all kind of falls into a trend line, at least from it does look, if you look at it, like a huge stretch in 7 years to go from 84,000 to 175,000. But I also know there's a huge demographic change taking place in the state, and so I'm not going to, until I see the breakdown, I'm unprepared to jump to the conclusion that it's unreasonable.
And what I would like to add is we went back and looked at the trend over time, and from 2006 to 2013, so that's 7 years. Just as this to get to 2020, that'll be 7 years from where we are now. We doubled in terms of the Hispanic completions, so we're actually looking to double again approximately in the next 7 years. So we have seen that very high rate of growth and completions for Hispanic students in Texas. So that was part of why we were more comfortable with this target that does look like
these are the first hard numbers we've really put out for the targets. Yeah. And so I think our experience with closing the gaps, for example, is over the next few months, you're going to look more carefully at these numbers, and we're going to have to provide you more information. These are not settled numbers by any means, and so they may end up somewhat different, but I think they're a very good starting point for those discussions. And so you really need to see more data, more of the background, and understand what the numbers represent.
And, quick question: Is it our business to adjust, dummy down our projections to account for the public ed underperforming in the area of college readiness? I don't know. It's just a question.
No, well, my answer to that is that we're at a process here where we've got to set the goals based on a competitive workforce and also one that's consistent with and not unrealistic as far as our growth rates. We need to continue to work that downward, and I think so that we can essentially have a goal for public education. I mean, I don't see, even though that's over under the TEA, I don't think it's unreasonable for one of our conclusions, one of our goals that we'll get to after these four at some point in the future, to have a goal for college readiness out of K through 12. I think we need to take some testimony, which we haven't yet, from the high school superintendents when we start talking about 19.6% is not acceptable, or particularly 11 or 12% out of the minority population. And that number has, obviously, if we're going to be at 60%, has to grow. How's that going to happen? So, but I think ultimately that's one of our sub goals or strategies to obtain the completion rate that we're looking towards for post-secondary attainment.
All right.
Yes, Jerry.
I missed the last meeting, so I didn't hear the discussion about including racial breakdown. But if I've got this right, I mean, right now there's roughly 170,000 non-African American Hispanic graduates. And to hit this 550, that has to go up to only 204,000. Have we really kind of focused on that? Is that consistent with demographic trends in the state?
Well, the data that we have when we looked at that is that we would need to get to 285,000 Hispanic completions in terms, and to be comparable to the percent of Hispanics in the population, what's being projected for 2030, so that our completions, we have about the same number of Hispanic students completing degrees as we have percentage of Hispanics in the population. So that's what we used for these projections.
But you're talking about non-Hispanic, non-African American.
Not African American, Anglo and others, Asian and all that. Yeah. It's a 30,000 increase. Okay. I don't know if that's right or wrong.
Well, the Anglo population is declining in this time. So even if that was the point I was trying to make earlier, even if the completion rate per capita is going up, there's not a lot of growth in that population as far as us meeting our goals. So that's the whole purpose of closing the gaps, is if we don't close the gap between the ethnic and racial groups, we can't have a competitive workforce. So and we're really at that point because the Anglo population is going down.
Well, again, I didn't participate in the conversation. I haven't seen the numbers, but I just want to make sure that in, the rapid growth we're having here, that we're not, setting the bar too low in terms of objectives for the Anglo and other group.
We'll have to decompose these numbers. We got to go to the next level to answer that question. So what's the assumed, success rate of the Asian and Anglo populations? How does that compare historically? What's the trend line? Is it consistent with the trend line?
It might be helpful if we laid all that out, if we're going to lay out just Hispanic.
No, I agree. It needs to be done for all the categories. Right.
And we can tell you that for the Asian American population, the graduation rates are considerably higher, and the trend is staying in that direction. We can tell you for women it's much higher. The Anglo population, it's much higher. It's really the numbers is a reflection of the changing demographics in terms of the number of Anglos that are graduating. So, and you heard we just got new demographic projections. We look at these regularly, and whenever the plan is adopted in whatever form, one thing we'll continue to carry to the board is changes in the demographics, changes. We changed our target for African Americans about 3 years into the plan. We thought we had understated the goal and increased it quite considerably. So those are things that we think, with an active plan, whatever is finally adopted, that we still need to monitor those, provide that information to the institutions, to our board, to make appropriate adjustments.
I have a slightly unrelated question, but I think somebody could answer this. I was driving my nephew over to an event at middle school on a Saturday, and as we came up to the middle school, the parking lot was full, and I said, "What's going on?" He said, "Oh, that's Japanese school." What did he mean by that? I mean, I don't know what he meant. Is there something? Are the Japanese kids going to school on Saturday?
No, I can tell you what that is.
Oh, okay.
That's Japanese employers in the area that go to private or public schools during the week, and then have Japanese schools, because those children at some point will go back to Japan. Most likely. I mean, they're here because there's investment that's created jobs, and they're the children of the managers that were sit here.
I do have one question as well. The goal is set in terms of absolute numbers. Targets 1 through 5 are set in absolute numbers. Targets 6 and 7 are in percentages. It's a little hard for me to mesh all those together. Can 6 and 7 be stated in absolute numbers as well, or do they need to be in percentages, or how does that fit in?
Well, when we looked at this, in fact, the breakout group that looked at this, we actually had even more of a mix with numbers and percentages. And when we went through, we made the determination that when we are looking at completions in higher education, we will use absolute numbers so that we have numbers for the completers by race, ethnicity, for male, female, for economically disadvantaged students. But then we spent a lot of time, and we could do it both ways, thinking about our target for the percentage of high school graduates who are enrolling in public education and what we thought that should look like in terms of numbers and percentages, and we thought it might convey it best to show it in terms of percentages. We don't, we do get some information, I think, about projected high school graduates into the future. I'm not sure how trustworthy it is. It hasn't been very good so far, apparently. So we made the decision, at least for now, to represent that target in percentages. And then in terms of the dual credit hours, we thought this would give you a good flavor. This is a new target that's being brought to you, that the group wanted to add a target for dual credit hours. And we wanted you to get a sense of the actual percent of students right now who are economically disadvantaged who are completing 12 or more hours. We can go back and provide those numbers to you and think about where we were going in terms of how overall, what part of the population we would like that to be. So I'll be happy to provide you with those numbers, but I think the group does need to decide, how do we want to express these targets. They could all be in numeric and not include percentages, but that's why we made that choice for the last two.
Actually, I tend to be more comfortable with percentages than
okay.
numbers.
Yeah. Well, the breakout group felt strongly that numbers might be more helpful in terms of counting over time. Are we reaching our numbers? What's the goal? And are we getting there? But I think that would be, I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on that.
Dr. Faulkner?
Yeah, I'd recommend using whatever it is whoever is responsible for is going to think about it. And I think the first several targets there are state policy targets. And the people who are going to be thinking about it's the coordinating board. Number 6 goes to individual campuses, and the people who are going to be thinking about it are going to be thinking in terms of percentage. So I would recommend that we not try to make it neat and having it all in one form, but have it in the form of what people who would have to deal with it would think in terms of.
Yeah, I would raise the question of an increase from 53.7 to 60%. Seems to be pretty modest in terms of where we think the number of graduates are going to go. And because it would imply here, but it's not stated and be one of those numbers that we need, is that our completion rate of those that are enrolled has to go significantly higher to reach the growth rates that we're talking about. So that would be another decomposition that I think that would be helpful.
Yes, and I believe we did look at that, and we also have to consider that not included are students who go out of state, because we're able to track those students who enroll in Texas, and we also know that some students don't go. This is a directly from high school goal, but we can go back and provide that information to you for how we got to the 60%.
Right. And one other comment before I forget about it is on the in-migration. That's probably been more closer to 25%. That doesn't mean that's a much riskier number. We've got it in at 10%. In other words, 10% of our pool in 2030 will actually have been immigrants, but it's been running much higher than that. Once again, risky, but that might give us a little bit of buffer to get into the 60%.
Okay, thank you. And that's referring back to the attainment goal.
Right.
Yes. Thanks.
What is the percentage of high school graduates who go to out-of-state institutions?
It's about 10%, give or take. Go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, when we have looked at it with, we had National Student Clearinghouse data for 2 years back in 08-09, and it ranged about 10%. But
are they then included in the in-migration and that we're anticipating in 2030? I mean, if you're a Texas resident, you go away and you come back. How do we handle that?
I would have to defer that one to Steve Murrock and the State Data Center on how they look at the in-migration. If their permanent residents always stayed as a Texas resident, even though they were attending a college out of state, they would probably not be part of the in-migration.
Yeah.
So that would depend on, how long did they go out of state? Did they stay out of state, complete a degree and then come directly back to Texas? Or did they go out and start working out of state before they came back to Texas? Then they would probably be an in-migration.
10% sounds very high to me. I mean,
That's of high school graduates that go out of state.
That actually, I looked at those data not too long ago. That's actually pretty middle of the road.
Yes? Okay.
Yeah. There are a lot of states, New York, New Jersey, send over 20% of their high school graduates to school out of state.
Yeah. And the difference there, of course, is the states are much smaller. If you live in New York and go to University of Virginia, it's like
so big deal.
Somebody in Houston going to Dallas.
Yeah.
But it's been hovering around 10%. We've used other means to estimate it in the past, and one factor that we have to consider in terms of drawing people out is that Texas is a growing population. There are many schools that are actively recruiting in Texas now that did not even 10 years ago.
Yeah.
That are Houston, not Houston, but Texas is a way to help maintain their enrollments.
Yeah, in every state that borders Texas, in every one of those states, the college-age population is declining. New Mexico, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana. So those states are aggressively recruiting Texas students.
But still, when they come back, we've got a way to pick those up as a way of,
Yes.
I mean, what category does that fit in? I mean, they're not really an immigrant in the sense that they...
I think we do need to clarify that with Steve in terms of how they would actually be categorized, but they will be picked up through the community survey and every 10 years in the census. And we should know that the further away we get from a census, the less accurate the data are, except in terms of projections. That's pretty good, but we have less detail. The community survey is useful. It's much more than we had in the past, but it's not as useful as an actual census. We're several years away from the next census.
May I ask one more question? Looking at possible strategies on this one, number 4, at least the paper I'm looking at has been deleted. Encourage qualified high school students to participate in dual credit. We are deleting that as a strategy?
Yes, that's because the group thought it was very important that we have a target, that rather than just say we want to encourage this, we actually want to track something related to dual credit and make sure that we're seeing improvement in terms of dual credit participation. And as the discussion developed, there was a lot of discussion about how dual credit is a real advantage for economically disadvantaged students. We went back and looked at the data, and of those students who had successfully completed at least 12 semester credit hours while in high school who were economically disadvantaged, 78%, so almost 80% of them enrolled in Texas higher education versus about 42% overall of economically disadvantaged students. The target was then crafted around that particular group of students who are often the students who don't go on to higher ed, but if they participate in dual credit, they see, wow, this is a wonderful, I can do this, this is something I want to continue. In terms of cost of their education, they're able to save a lot of money, especially if they complete, a full semester's worth or more, which is going to be 12 semester credit hours, almost a full semester. So that's why that decision was made to remove it from the strategy and actually have a target.
Also, from a strategy standpoint, and Wynn might have more to add on this, but the state has said that each public high school has to offer at least 12 semester credit hours of dual credit or AP or IB. And so that's just kicking into place. And so there's actually, at the state level, a policy that really encourages this in an important kind of way.
Okay, maybe we should move on to the strategies.
Well, wait, Dr. Ross.
Again, I'd say that was one of the wise policy decisions that we have that creates this platform for all students. Where I would go back to, though, is offering versus students taking advantage of it, and then the cost, where it's available at no cost to the student versus where the student may have an out-of-pocket cost for tuition and fees. And that's the thing that, in my view, will probably drive participation.
So we actually have a target in terms of how many people are actually, what percent are actually doing it. So we're trying to make sure there isn't just a policy in place, but students are actually enrolling and taking those courses.
Early.
Just quickly, and it may be understood based on what you've just said, Dr. Rosser, and also you. I liked for, and we've talked about starting earlier, would there be any interest in changing to encourage middle school students to participate in dual credit early college IB, because we're not using the term early college anywhere. And after today's presentation, we're using dual credit, but is there any way to add the ECHS in here, early college high school program, or is it not necessary? Just a question. And my other one was on number 7. We talked about reduced time to degree. And I'm looking at the slide Dr. Rosser presented. Here's how we can reduce time to degree and debt. And he states it very clearly. And it's, again, early college, dual credit.
I think the early college would be a mechanism to deliver dual credit, and if we could provide everyone the really tightly integrated partnerships that come from an early college model, where you have a school, whether it be the small campus as the model originated, or the larger comprehensive high schools as the model is trying to be migrated now, that would be the best case. But anyway, early college would be included in dual credit hours, I think, as I'm reading this.
Yes, it would be.
So that would be a mechanism for delivery, one of several.
Okay, I'm good.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, Julie.
Okay. So I want to go back to Dr. Rosser's report, because you said it again and reminded me of the discrepancies, no cost to some cost. So I'd like to see if there's any interest in us considering at some time, not today, but as part of the strategy, to have a state policy that maximizes the success and uniformity of all Texas students enrolling in early college dual credit, or that we reduce those number of programs or eliminate them that have a cost driver for a student. Does anybody? You all hate it, huh?
And that's often, I think that would be wonderful, but it's often linked to community colleges that are delivering the dual credit and the service area versus the taxing district. And, so there's, so nothing is free. What's driving this affordability, the state or someone is paying for it. I think so. It's a matter of how those institutional costs are offset when students are outside the taxing district, for example. That's from what I've been able to gather from the field. That's the thing that drives the cost issue the most.
There's also the question of capacity. I think just mandating it for the state, or to have it a goal of universal availability or universal application, I'm not sure it's realizable.
No. If you scale it particularly fast.
Any thought in the direction of dual credit online?
Yeah, there are some programs out there now. There is some dual credit online. UT Arlington had a program. I don't think their enrollments are as high as we might have thought they would be when that first began. We'd have to look back at some of the success of students in terms of those online dual credit programs. Remember, if these are students' first college experiences, online may work for some, but may not work for others, especially if it's something new for them to be experiencing, the rigor of a college course and the differences in terms of how the course is structured, the requirements, all of that. But we can go look at that more closely.
There is at least one example of an online early college high school. The University of Texas of the Permian Basin is operating. It's a recent designation available from the TEA for an early college high school, but it is early. They're just in their second year. One in Houston as well. Okay, I'm not familiar with that one, but I visited UT Permian Basin, been in a classroom of high school students receiving their dual credit via distance, and they're going to great lengths to make sure that it does match the rigor, and the students must visit the higher ed campus at least 6 times. They've done a 2-week bridge program on campus, so they're trying to get the best for students who are, in some cases, 5 hours away from the university, 5 hours away from the nearest community college. What do you do in those cases? And so this is one of those things where you don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, but trying to maximize the most that they can for the students where there are limited opportunities otherwise.
Jerry, and then we need to move on.
Okay, yeah, just to reiterate what you were saying, I mean, in our community college district, we had 7 school districts. Some paid, some didn't. The ones that didn't pay, we didn't have any enrollees. I mean, it really was what would the school district support it or not, because the college had no capacity to support dual credit in the absence of getting paid for it.
Okay. If we have a consensus here, if everybody feels comfortable about our completion goal, at least comfortable enough that we can have a dialogue at the convening next week, I'd like to move on. And with that, Ginger will talk about marketable skills.
Thank you. The small breakout group that met last month looked through the goal and the targets and the strategies, and for the most part, they left the goal intact. The targets were relatively intact as well, but the strategies, they combined several of them. So most of the changes you see here, for example, number 5 is deleted because we combined it with several strategies into 1 and 2. One of the things this group talked about last time was whether or not these skills should be demonstrated. And we talked about that internally with staff for several times, actually. And we decided we would rather include that as a strategy so that institutions could have autonomy on how to decide whether or not how the marketable skills will be demonstrated. What we wanted to avoid was a situation where students were completing a coursework, completing a program, earning a credential, and then having to take some other assessment to demonstrate a marketable skill. We were worried that would become burdensome on the student, and we didn't want to add that layer of evidence on the student's part. So that is something we've included in the strategies. We've also added a strategy where we want to leverage existing efforts. One of the things we've talked about before is nationally and statewide, there are already efforts geared towards developing marketable skills. Sometimes they're called learning outcomes, but the core is a great example of that, a field of study, which you heard about earlier. While it needs some finessing, it is a program that exists and can be leveraged to help contribute towards achieving this goal. We also struck out internally the provide teacher candidates strategies. And we wanted to talk with you about that because we felt like maybe that strategy is better suited for one of the other goals. And we wanted to get your feedback on that, if you could take a moment to review it. One of the reasons this came up is because as we looked through our agency and the deliverables we expect from each department, each division, we really do guide our work based on the higher education plan. And in the Closing the Gaps plan, there was an item about looking at teachers and trying to encourage people to become teachers. But we're not looking at that now. And we're not looking at particular fields of study like STEM. And we just wanted to get your thoughts on whether or not you think that's something we need to build into this plan.
And we're defining teachers here at the K through 12 level, higher education, or both?
We're talking about K-12 or P-12.
My reaction is that there are so many things that we have, so many boxes we have to check to get teachers prepared that adding another box is not a good idea in my mind.
Leave it out.
I tend to agree with that. And this was the breakout group I was in, but as I think about it, we were talking about meeting with employers and Chamber of Commerce, et cetera, to define the marketable skills. Are we going to have a sort of statewide definition of marketable skills, or is it going to be one thing in the Houston area, another thing in the Dallas area?
Okay, thank you for reminding me of that.
All right, good.
Rex Peebles and I met last week, and in your binder, in your folder, on the right side, the very back, there is a page where we have drafted a definition of marketable skills. And for those, for the benefit of those watching from home, students exit from any degree program with a variety of skills. Marketable skills are those valued by employers that can be applied in a variety of work settings, including interpersonal, cognitive, and applied skill areas. These skills can be either primary or complementary to a major and are acquired by students through curriculum delivery.
That kind of answers my question, and in a way it doesn't. Is there going to be a statewide list of marketable skills, or will each university or college define what they consider to be marketable skills?
Where we were headed was that really the departments would identify these skills, and that we would think that in some ways there would be an overlap. So if you're talking about an accounting degree, clearly there should be an overlap in terms of what that is. But there still might be some unique things that the department might want to provide on top of that. That the challenge is going to be for many of the liberal arts in particular to identify marketable skills that may complement what they already are attaining, but we think we think it's really important to leave it to the department and to work with industry. Already, departments, if they have a specialized accrediting body, need to work with them. That's going to be easier for them. Already, for all programs, the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools makes certain requirements to follow up your graduates, and I think what this does is really emphasize that you need to take that perhaps a little more seriously than some departments do. We're anticipating if you do this, I've actually talked to some folks, including the liberal arts dean that was here several weeks ago, about whether we might want to, as a state, pursue foundation funding for working across institutions to develop at least some baseline information for that. I think it would be helpful for everybody not to do everything totally individually, but we still think it's important for institutions to be actively engaged in thinking about this, and for the coordinating board or some other entity not to tell them this is exactly what you need to do. At least that was our intent.
I think it was Ginger who said that we didn't want to force the kids to demonstrate these skills because it would be another layer of things they have to do. Should we try and get some feedback from employers, or is there any way to verify that we got the job done?
Yeah, I think, again, going back to what I'm saying, I think that the institution should work with employers. What we were concerned about was there being some implementation of state exams of some type that everyone would have to take. We think that's the wrong approach. It's also stagnant very quickly. Employer needs vary, and I think we want to have an active environment. But the assumption would be that if this is pursued, that they would need to essentially lay out how the students are going to demonstrate this to them, and hopefully within the context of what they already do. So it might be taken into account in terms of, in a way, in terms of a course that they've always offered. But their grade hasn't always taken into account something that's actually demonstrated. It can vary. It would be hard to talk about various fields because it could be demonstrated in different ways. But we think it would be best for departments themselves to think about how to do that, and an institution to think about it as well. And there are other ways of doing this. There was, I was just shared by staff an article in the Wall Street Journal this morning, apparently, that internships have not really increased much over the last couple of decades. It's increased from something like 20% to 33% of students engage in internships. And just happened to have a picture of students from UT Austin down at NASA, or talking with people from NASA. But there are various ways to achieve this and to be engaged, and we think it will vary by field, and whether you're in an urban area or a rural area might have some impact in terms of how you achieve some of these things and institutional resources. But at least I think it's important that you use the creativity of institutions in terms of thinking about how to do this in a meaningful way, and to do it in a way that they need to really be engaged in it themselves and really implement it into their regular instruction. The commissioner always talks about not adding an extra course. How do you integrate it into what you're doing? I don't know if I mentioned before, apparently there's an honors college at Texas A&M for business, and that as freshmen they're already talking about how to communicate better within the workforce, how, not just communications in general, but how to address various problems in a meaningful way, even things that are sort of outside the curriculum in terms of what's appropriate behavior and dressing in the workplace. They're starting to demonstrate as a freshman, and that was all implemented by faculty. Nobody imposed that upon them. And I think that's the wise way to go.
Yes, Raymond.
Yeah, we don't plan to, or we wouldn't recommend it. We define marketable skills with any degree of specificity. There is no consensus among employers about what marketable skills are. They simply say critical thinking skills, good communication skills, good teamwork skills, good work ethic, and I don't think we'd want to go far beyond that. I've been thinking in terms, and in fact we're doing a study on this, I've been thinking in terms of trying to launch an initiative across the state similar to the kinds of initiatives we have in higher education periodically, like writing across the curriculum, where whether you're taking an engineering course or an English course, an anthropology course, your writing is paid attention to. And we've been thinking about launching a similar initiative related to marketable skills, that every faculty member should work with his or her students to make sure that they have skills that employers seek and that they can articulate that they have. I've said any number of times in testimony recently that we raise questions in Texas about whether we're producing too many anthropology majors, philosophy majors, English majors, and I've said I think that's the wrong question. The right question is, how do you make sure that all English majors and philosophy majors and anthropology majors have marketable skills? So that we were looking at that level of generalization. We know that there are programs around the state and around the country that seek very consciously to make sure students can identify their marketable skills and sell them to employers. But it would be a general approach. I think that some professional schools, for example, I think engineering schools, I think that schools of education would clearly identify what their strong marketable skills are. But I was thinking more in terms of fields like the social sciences and the humanities, where we don't do that historically very well.
Woody?
Go ahead, Gary.
I guess when I look at this, I mean, I'm totally agree with everybody should identify marketable skills and try to sell those skills to employers. But I guess if I'm looking at this in general, how do I know in 15 years whether these institutions have actually identified the correct marketable skills? I mean, because it seems to me that this goes only so far, and one can't say for sure that unless they actually got a job that they actually identified the correct marketable skills.
Yeah, with that in mind, I see, and I didn't realize that we had a target. We'd started with it as a goal, but I think we should still have a target which really addresses employment, and we have that data. And it will vary, some institutions have a lot of students go out of state or to Qatar, as some people mention. But as a state, we can get at that very clearly. And the assumption would be, too, that we'd really need schools to certify this was happening, that they actually had this in place. And if this is adopted, I think it would change how we evaluate proposed new programs. We would ask for them to identify how they're going to address marketable skills in their program when it comes in place. But
So, David, are you suggesting to this that we should have some quantitative, in addition to the qualitative goals as far as employment, wages, within certain time frames?
Well, I think
as evidence that
yes,
marketable skills.
Yeah. For community colleges, we already, for many years, have required that there be a certain employment rate within a certain time across the institution. And I'm not suggesting that, but what I'm suggesting is that for the state, we have a figure in terms of, X percent should be employed within X period of time. And we have enough history of that we can take into account the employment out of state, other countries. And some of our most successful students leave the state, and we recognize that. But we could put that into place. We have the mechanics to do it already, and frankly, as we go forward, we're going to get better and better at that. And I think nationally, there's at least a chance that over the next 5 or 6 years, there may be the opportunity to match Social Security records or IRS records to see if there's employment elsewhere, because that's being discussed, and there have been some pilots in that regard. We don't have that ability now. And then, of course, you need to really be careful about your privacy issues as you go forward.
Yes, great.
To your question and to your point, I think it's with the passage of House Bill 5 too, that one of the assumptions with that bill is that employers regionally and locally would engage with the education institutions and advise them as to what their needs were. And I think, some areas, some chambers are doing that more and better than others, and I think it's going to be very spotty across the state. So having some kind of standard or guideline and proposed measurement, I think, is timely and would be beneficial.
Right. And I think this is I happened to hear, and Dee did as well earlier this week, a panel of our legislative and the House leadership, and talking about HB 5 and talking about the shift toward more vocational training. And the implication was, and one of the examples was that we were turning out too many liberal arts graduates that graduated with too much debt and no job, and by I never quite got the connection, but by better vocational training in the K through 12 system, we were doing a better job of matching. So I do think we have a question that needs to be answered as far as how does this plan help connect with the workforce, not only in terms of completions, but in terms of marketable, monetizable, however you describe it, that we've got a connection there, that we're focused on a connection there by goal and by process, by strategy.
We can add a target along those lines very quickly.
Yeah. Because I think it will be a question that'll be in the legislative mind.
Then going forward, you may have ways you want to modify it, or that you have an ultimate way you'd like to target that we can work towards and improving our ability to make that more and more accurate as we go forward.
Yeah.
Also remember, House Bill 5 was the tail wagging the dog. It was a reaction to all the testing, and it was driven by parental groups and certain teaching groups and other things. I mean, it was a reverse of normally what might occur. And so the legislature said, okay, we'll give you more flexibility. And that was it was to quell the outcry over the number of tests being given. And the arguments from the teachers' unions and the teachers and everybody else, including parental groups. There was a whole association that was traveling the state doing that. So we just need to be mindful of that as we compare. I'm not sure that was necessarily the correct outcome. I mean, we in APISD went back and added Algebra 2. We said we will have Algebra 2. And so it just kind of depends, but we need to be mindful of when the tail wags the dogs as opposed to what's substantive for long term.
Okay, does everybody feel comfortable moving forward on marketable skills as our third goal? And now we'll move to the last goal, and we're maybe running even a little bit ahead of time. We've lost a couple. I know we're going to lose Dr. Faulkner shortly, so finishing early will not be bad. Paul, do you want to talk about student debt?
Can't get up.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
So our group met, and you can see we had just a few edits to what was there before. They had a conversation about the goal, but no changes there, and no changes for the two maintenance targets that went directly with that goal. We did have one edit to the third target. They wanted to add that comment at the bottom to continue helping the neediest of students, but they were fairly comfortable with the structure of that one. No change to target number 4, but since you've last seen this, we've added a 5th target that we think is fairly important. Its function is to not only consider how much debt there is, but how many have debt. So we now have a target that will attempt to limit those who have debt to no more than half of the graduates. And we laid in numbers to match the completion goal.
So this is to make sure that, right now we only have, I think, about 57% of our students have debt, that we not increase the number of debts but achieve the goal. Number of students with debt but achieve the goal overall. And so it's really a little bit of a border in terms of the goal being played. But it's still pretty much keeping us in line with where we are now.
I have a question.
Yes. That's Kathy.
My question is under number 4. Can you give me the background or data that you use to come up with a realistic figure of no more than 3 semester credit hours that were...
Well, the first thing that really helps this, and I can imagine you get really concerned when you see 3 semester credit hours. That's only one course above.
Yeah, well, I mean, we just, went through rock climbing a little while ago.
Right.
So.
The first thing that helps this goal quite a bit is dual credit is not included in the number. So if a student takes, say, 30 hours of dual credit in high school, then they'll complete with 90 hours and not 120. Even though they're completing 120 college level hours, they're not counting toward the tracking of this goal. So it makes it fairly feasible to reach. Does that answer the question?
No, I'm just trying to go back and look at the current data on dual credit. Currently, 78.2% enroll.
That's of those with economically disadvantaged that took 12 hours. Right. Don't know that we have.
So I was trying to figure out what the critical mass was.
And one of the moving parts here that isn't addressed is that we're just nearing the process of getting degrees down to 120 semester credit hours in general. I think 18% of our baccalaureate degrees require more than that right now. And so the number of hours has gone down. And the same process is just starting for community colleges, as they're required to undergo the same process but to 60 hours for those. And so this is something that we're really going to have to monitor this one closely. But right now, when you have a little over 100,000 students with dual credit, if you're not counting that will decrease that. And these are students who are actually completing their degrees. Unfortunately, some of the people who take the most hours do not complete their degrees. I think this is one we need to really continue to do a little bit of analysis with. You recall when Stan Jones came in, this is one of the key targets is to get, and we heard some of the testimony this morning, that trying to get students through more efficiently, trying to get them through the courses they really need, that this gets students to where they're completing in an efficient kind of way. It decreases their cost, it decreases the state cost. And yes, sir.
Well, one of the things, and I don't know where this fits in as a correlation, but if we increase the grants programs at the state level, then you have a corresponding reduction in the cost for the student. So I don't know that that's going to happen, but that's also a part, and I didn't see that addressed anywhere in here, although I'm not sure they're going to want to go with that. Anyway.
The overheads actually brings up this point.
Lori?
On the Texas Grants Program?
No, in terms of the debt burden, that the various factors, and one of them includes that. I don't know if we have that available, that chart.
No, I don't think we can.
Yes, Jerry.
Does this relate to bachelor graduates, baccalaureate graduates?
Undergraduate, yes.
So this is not 2-year and this not certificates and all that?
Yes,
it
does.
includes all undergraduate certificates.
Well, then how could you have currently 77,000, which you say is 50%, when on the other page you show, on the second target, you show currently it's 291,000 graduates. Maybe I'm just not understanding that.
I'm sorry, I didn't follow the question. I apologize.
That's how many currently have
Debt. So those are the students that are graduating with debt.
Well, but I don't understand why you'd say at the end of 5, currently 76,804, or 50%. Is that 50% of all those certificate and associate degrees and masters and all that? What are we talking about? I'm trying to understand this in connection with the completion.
Let's follow up with that. There might be a reason. I just can't think of it.
So we see what you're getting.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, all these numbers have to be internally consistent from goal to goal to go. And I'd raise the issue from a policy on dual credits and viewing them as an offset against the hours earned. In other words, essentially, as I understood what was being said earlier, if somebody only takes 90 hours to get a degree, but they didn't really do 90 hours. They did 30 hours as dual credit that was paid for by somebody. And so they really took 120, or another way to say it, let's say they did 120 in college and they did 30 as dual credit. So it really took them 150, but we're only going to count them as 120. I don't know whether we're really getting to the policy issue. In other words, at least I'd argue that why wouldn't we include those 30 hours of dual credit in the calculation and not as an offset that makes us look like we've got fewer over hours? Because an over hour is an over hour. Somebody had to pay for it. Now, maybe it was a public school system that paid for it instead of the individual, or maybe the individual paid a little bit of it as a public high school student. But still, it's a misallocation of resources if that student that only needed 90 hours for his bachelor's degree or 30 hours for his associate degree goes 30 hours over.
Yeah, that's exactly correct, and that gets to the cost for producing each associate and baccalaureate degree. And perhaps we took the wrong course here, but this is addressed specifically on how we can keep student debt down, which is to reduce the number of hours they have to borrow money to produce. So
maybe there's two issues here. Maybe the one I'm talking about goes into another goal we haven't addressed that we touched on earlier, and that's the cost goal about how much we spend our resources per degree. And this one is just focused on debt. But the debt might be there. It might be some school district's debt that exists because they built a new building to go house an early college high school. But
it could be there. Maybe there needs to be an accompanying target. But I think it's important for us to focus on how the student acquires the debt. At the same time, the reality is if we're more efficient in reducing the cost for each degree, that can potentially free up money for student grants and other things, because we're not spending 100,000 or paying for 100,000 semester credit hours that aren't really yielding anything. So you free up money for for grants potentially.
I think the issue is cost to whom, and in this case, this context, it would be cost to the student, cost to the family. But the academic maps, the pathways idea that Dr. Abel talked about, reducing time to degree, inclusive of early college or dual credit, plus whatever would be earned at a college or a university, would drive, I think, what you're talking about, Mr. Hunt.
Right.
In fact, I'm glad you brought that up, because I don't think anyone's mentioned whether we need to develop a strategy related to what we heard this morning that could actually help with student debt and also to the completion, that there may be a strategy we need to add, if not at this meeting, in the future, that reflects that conversation.
I think it's important, and I've made that statement a number of times, that essentially this needs to be viewed as a political document because we're trying to get support. And in that sense, I think connecting to the workforce is a part of that, and marketable skills is a part of that, but also in terms of being more cost effective, which essentially are hours, controlling the number of hours per completion, I think is a part of that strategy, but it sends the message that we're making recommendations in a way of being good steward of public dollars. I think that's the way to ultimately get support not only for policies but for funding.
Well, would it be appropriate to add a target that addresses the state's cost to degree to go along to accompany the one that we have included here?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we could definitely do that, and I think that would address that issue.
Yeah. So why don't we look at? I don't think we need to do that for your meeting next week, but with something this committee can look at the next meeting or when appropriate.
Bring back at least one alternative, if not more. Bring back at least one alternative, not more than one possible target to address that.
Okay.
For you.
Go ahead.
Oh, yes, Shirley.
I keep going back to Dr. Rosser's presentation, but I love the statement on recommendations for cost-effective and then time to degree. I don't know if it will go here or in the previous goal, but where he says, ensure a high school student's 61st hour is at a university to avoid excess hours not applying to a degree. I don't know, isn't that a great strategy? I like that. And again, once again, I don't see where we're talking about increasing, encouraging, supporting early college and dual credit to do both of those two, time to degree and save money, decrease debts. But if it's already understood, it almost seems like we need a definition section in our plan that says, when we talk about dual credit, that includes early college, and define it for people, or define. I love Dee's example of adult basic ed is perfect. That definition means probably something different to everybody here, and you've got to have a speak with one voice type thing, and maybe we need a little definition section where, for purposes of this document, since it's a 15-year document, we have some common definitions. Just a thought. I keep a definition section in my little University of Houston notebook, and particularly with acronyms, because acronyms in higher ed are totally different than pub ed, and I know we drive the general public crazy with our acronyms. Just a thought.
Yeah. Yes, Wynn.
Just to follow up, ma'am, I think there is a model in El Paso with EPCC, El Paso Community College, and UTEP. Again, there are 350 students enrolled there right now, and they're doing well, and they're progressing into the majors as home students at UTEP, and they're doing well. The reason it's possible, and you say, well, it's just El Paso. They're out there by themselves. They're isolated. But again, 70-80% of the students in our state stay local for higher education. The early college high schools tend to cluster in regions, so it's very doable between early college and universities, and it's doable as well for dual credit if the students are earning up to that threshold of 60 hours.
It's almost like you need a statement in the strategy, since 70% of our students do stay local, only 10% go out of state. It would seem that would be a great way to decrease debt.
So those kind of realities that come out of the great coordinating board data that we have in this state have influenced our grant making and the way that we think about what we can do as a foundation in the state. It's totally changed the way that we think about what we do in places.
And when we do policy, when we get this thing together before the legislature, you're going to have to throw something in there about Texas grants and everything else and how it fits Otherwise, they'll confuse it. It'll be separate. Okay? Trust me, I served on appropriations. I know. Okay? But you got to have it all together and simplified on what it means as a part of the total cost structure, because they got multiple piles.
Well, I think that where we will lead there is, given the demographic change, the need to increase, for example, the Hispanic population completion as much as what we saw. We've got the income numbers for those families. We can connect, I think, incomes to completions. We've seen that data. We saw it earlier today. You know, you're less than 10% if you're in the bottom, 10% of the income level. Your chances of completion are a tenth what the higher income levels are. So that somewhere in that section on how we get to those sub-targets, those interim targets, we need to have a discussion around financial aid and Texas grants. So.
May I ask one question?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, Jim.
This is the only one of our goals that's limited to public institutions, and I understand that. I guess my question bouncing around in my mind is, do we want to have any sort of strategy where we educate folks about the differences, perhaps in debt, between going to a for-profit school as opposed to public institution? I mean, because we're not doing anything for those that are going to a for-profit school, according to this. The other thing, a little bit of a sideline, I was wondering, do for-profit universities accept dual credit? And I have no idea if that's the case. But anyway, question and comment.
I know some of them do. DeVry, we've talked to. University of Phoenix obviously does. So some of them do. I don't think all of them do, but it's kind of all over the board.
Laterno does.
Laterno does, yes.
And I guess the other question, do we want to, on this goal or any goal, ignore for-profit schools on something like this and strictly direct it to public universities? And I don't have the answer, I'm just bringing up the question.
I think you're correct that we focus student debt in terms of public institutions. The other goals do include all the institutions. So we do have to count that. I think we might have some challenge in terms of even the data for the other institutions.
And there's a very good reason, is because the equation that creates the debt includes state appropriations, which are not going to affect the for-profit, but have a direct impact on student debt that go to public universities. So,
the vast majority of our students do attend public institutions.
Right, about 90% in the state. Okay, well, I think we're ready to move on this fourth goal. If everyone feels comfortable, it'll be one of those that we mentioned. It's not a final approval, but that we will go public in a semi-public way next Friday with it. Like that. Okay, and with that, everybody has got a schedule of our meetings through our last meeting on July 23rd. So we're actually, I think, maybe at the midpoint here, or maybe the next meeting. We're at the break point of going over and starting downhill. December 12th is a Friday. It's in the middle of December. So we're going to ask for a response on that pretty quickly today, tomorrow, Monday at the latest. It affects both our attendance and our ability to attract presenters like we saw today. Could be affected by the time of year. So the possibility exists that we, just like we did for the July meeting, we will not have a December meeting and we will restart in January. But that'll be based first on input, and and if that attendance looks good, then we'll see whether we can deliver the same quality of presentations that you've grown to expect. So if everybody could respond to Mary, I would appreciate it. And with that, if we don't have, we're actually running a little bit ahead, but we have lost a few members. So I'm ready for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right, motion made and none opposed. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much for another very good meeting.